Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. It was one of those days where either I could have streamed fairly early, around 7, 8, 9, even 10 in the morning, maybe even noon, or I could have streamed later, and I have been noticing that bump of views I was getting when I streamed later seemed to be dwindling down when I was streaming early. I'm still probably not hitting the middle ground that would be my target time, and I'm certainly not keeping any kind of consistency in any ways. But yeah, we're gonna have a later night stream this Wednesday, February 28th, and see how that goes. Also, there was a misscheduling that happened as far as my coverage of Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, so there was actually quite a lot airing extra today around noon. So yep, we'll leave it at that. A Rookie and Returner Mutual Follower campaign Soul Sword structured deck giveaway is available, which I don't know if this is the same Rookie and Returner giveaway or if this is a different giveaway. It's probably the same because the campaign code on mine is the same. And how long does this go? Because yeah, the problem here I think is that you really would have to just have a group of friends that you hadn't in the past 2 years convinced to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, that now that they're doing this campaign you're trying to convince to either come back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel or play it for the first time, and it just doesn't seem realistic. I haven't even really seen other YouTubers, which I guess I don't really follow other YouTubers who play Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, but I haven't seen anybody else really try and promote their campaign codes. Here's my campaign code, which is 3FEB1766. If somebody wants to start playing or return to Master Duel and type in that code, that'd be nice, but I don't expect too much that's ever going to happen. Yeah. And yeah, the only thing I guess you really could do is maybe make a secondary account, wait 30 days, and then take your own sock puppet accounts, make several of them, and start playing them yourself. Otherwise you just don't get these rewards, which means the vast majority of people are not going to get these rewards. They've edited the wording to a different time in the Duel Pass ending, which, okay, so they've changed the time slightly. That really probably doesn't need a main notice, but the notices in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are weird. There should probably be just a fourth category, major notices and then minor notices that they don't really care about you knowing about. Then a survey, yeah, just not important information at all to go through when you first enter Yu-Gi-Oh! And then I'm compounding the error by looking at the notices the way the game wants me to look at them. Obviously it wouldn't be showing me them if it didn't want me to look at them. For the accountability section today, I think we can be fairly quick and just jump into the news and try and get a shorter experience. Overall, been doing a lot of sleeping and been doing a lot of playing of Divide by Sheep. This is the only festival worth continuing to play, and I think there is probably still a slight reason to just show this off and try and get, hopefully the idea would be to get to this point and get 200 gems and get the daily quests, the festival special quests done. I'm almost done with Divide by Sheep, but I very possibly am just going to end up using a walkthrough to solve the last 3 or 4 puzzles. I've done all of the levels. You don't get any kind of credits or any special recognition at all when you've gotten at least 1 star on every puzzle in Divide by Sheep, and it's really just potentially looking for achievements. As far as what I'm doing now is just trying to get 3 stars on every puzzle, or just being thorough on a game that's, for a math game, not really good. A math game that literally has no numbers in it ever. That it has an odd amount of gore and blood in it for no good reason. That doesn't really have any consistency on the difficulty. It doesn't feel like it's difficulty spikes for rising action and then difficulty valleys for falling action, where puzzles are really easy. In fact, it feels like most of the puzzles, if you are in the right mindset, which often just means if you make the first move and realize the correct first move in a series of about a dozen moves per puzzle, you will get the solution really, really fast. However, if you lock into the wrong first move, that's when your brain, my brain at least, locks into that thought pattern and can't break out of that thought pattern, and then it feels way, way too hard. There is absolutely no happy middle that happens on any of the puzzles, where it feels like you can do the 1-star challenge, and then you have to think about you can do the 1-star challenge very easy, the 2-star challenge is medium difficulty, and the 3-star challenge is very difficult. That would necessitate that there would be like 3 different bespoke solutions, and there really aren't 3 different bespoke solutions for most of them. There are variations on one solution that is right, and then if you only get 90% of the way there, you'll only get 2 stars instead of 3. But yeah, unfortunately, Divide by Sheep is just another example of the failure of the game industry to make any kind of good educational software in favor of, in this case, I would just say being understaffed and underpolished, underfunded. Divide by Sheep looks like it's been made by 4 people, and visually it looks very decently polished, although how much of that is just going to the Unity asset store or the Unreal Engine asset store and buying pre-made art from somebody else, who knows. There are some logical flaws in the design. For instance, when pigs land on a platform, they cover the platform with a black ink, which plays absolutely no role in the game at all. The ink doesn't do anything other than cover up what the platform looks like somewhat. So there's exactly one puzzle where you have flame burners on the platform and pigs are on top of it, so you don't see that the flame burners are there. But that is exactly once in what is probably somewhere around 120 puzzles. Yeah, either 120 or 150 puzzles. What you would have thought would have been the big sales point would have been the laser walls that cut the sheep in half to give you 1/2 fractions. This guy is playing like crazy while this is all going on. But yeah, it definitely is a case where had you simply had some numbers in it, had more of an educational focus, not had a crazy level of... I can't do anything here, can I? Wow. Yeah. Yeah, had you not had a crazy level of gore, then Divide by Sheep might be something that could sell. It definitely feels like a cell phone game that is trying to stand out from all the other cell phone games. And if I'm going to blame the game industry in general, I think a lot more blame needs to fall on the fact that there is just a horrible race to the bottom as far as quality of games on cell phones. Whereas nobody is really standing out at all, quality-wise. I literally can't summon anything, apparently, this turn, so just a wasted turn for me. That's crazy. I am still streaming, dual streaming, to, let's see, both YouTube and Twitch. So let me just, at some point, OBS seems to have changed here. I don't know what happened there. Yeah, that's my second version of OBS running. But yeah, besides playing Divide by Sheep, I'm still watching that Hulu show, A Shop for Killers. It definitely feels to me like A Shop for Killers probably should be like from a manga. It feels like it's something that would be from... If it's a Korean show, it probably would have been a manhwa, not a manga. Just a Korean way of saying manga. But that differentiates it in that Korean people made the comic instead of a manga, which would imply Japanese people made the comic. But yeah. You kind of have to stick with it to get to the good part of the story. Otherwise, it is just going to start off with the uncle character being a bad guy, and like even in the middle, the uncle character is still kind of this John Wick bad guy type character who is increasingly a victim of circumstances, and you certainly could take it that way. But if you actually look at it from a different perspective, he still is very much a bad guy, because as far as I've gotten in the story, it's pretty obvious he chose to abandon his family to run off and be a mercenary. He ran into a psychopathic person who was in the mercenary group. He pissed off the psychopath by trying to kill him and trying to spare civilians from being massacred, or one civilian or multiple civilians, take a pick. And so he makes this psychopath his enemy. So after abandoning his family, then he returns to his family after stopping from being from being a mercenary, knowing that, or at least I guess he is assuming or thinking that he had killed the psychopath, but he brings danger, almost certainly, even if it wasn't a psychopath after being a mercenary. He knew he was being followed by the mercenary group and watched. And it's not like he's going straight legit. After he stops being a mercenary, he starts running a underground gun weapons shop. So yeah, he just brings danger to his family completely, gets his sister-in-law and his brother killed, gets his mother killed, then he's taking in the daughter of the brother and sister-in-law, and then he's training her, I think subconsciously, into being a killer or assassin type, mercenary type person, even if he doesn't really want that for her. He just knows he's brought so much danger to her now, so he's trying to protect her, but he's definitely feels like he's just like not a logical thinker. And when you first see him, he does come off like he's this half autistic guy. But yeah, he really just feels like the bad guy at every point. And then the story, which jumps around, has him killing himself, leaving the now grown up daughter to fend for herself in this thought that if he agreed to kill himself, the bad guys would leave the daughter alone, which absolutely they did not and would not. When really the right move would have been for him to A, not be a mercenary in the first place, because that is just a life of danger, and that was always going to lead to something bad happening, whether he would end up getting killed or he would end up pissing off somebody who would come back for revenge. B, after being a mercenary, he should have just disappeared and never returned to his family. Now I know Korean family responsibility is very different, so, and disappearing in Korea might be very difficult, although he could have probably just fled to a different country. And C, after the brother and daughter-in-law and the mother all were killed by the psycho killer, and he knew that there was this whole, the psycho killer had a bunch of henchmen that were all coming for his family, he should have put the daughter up for, or I guess niece. He should have put her niece up for adoption, which maybe there's a Korean element to that. So it becomes this really contrived thing, very much, where they have bent over backwards to make you ignore how many options he really ignored to create this horrifically dangerous situation, which at the present time has the niece being hunted down and tried to kill, just out of spite, and in part because he put her in charge of the secret gun running shop. So yeah, I'm still watching Shop for Killers too. I've also been working with Google Excel on making a cleaning checklist, which I've returned to a few times, just trying to get notes and details for a cleaner. Just like, here's the OCD way I would like things cleaned, and here's how the order you should do things in, because the cleaner has time limitations. Which that definitely has revealed to me that if I had enough time, if I had enough energy, if I had enough ability, I would probably be a fairly OCD cleaner myself if I was going to clean myself. But I think that's probably true for most people, that if you have a hired cleaner and you're paying somebody, you would expect them to do a better job than what you would do yourself. In the same way that if I hired somebody to repair my car, I would expect them to do a better job than what I could do myself, which is to say I couldn't repair a car at all. That's the whole idea of labor being called skilled labor, although most companies try to degrade a lot of jobs by saying they aren't. They are unskilled labor, and that's just not really true. If you care even a little bit about whatever task you're doing, whether you're being paid for a job or otherwise, you're going to develop skills and techniques to get better at it. And a lot of times, though, you're so underpaid or you're so hamstrung by middle management giving you rules and regulations that don't make any logical sense that a lot of people do just not care. Which that's a valid way certainly to work a job too, is to just not care about the quality and not really take any pride in it, because very often you can't take any pride in your work. And it's very hard to define what pride in your work would be. But none of that has really anything to do with video games. If anything, I think I've probably just been sleeping more than anything, which I still don't have a way of fixing that. So we've got some Twitter news here. I follow this Charles Cecil, who is the CEO of Revolution Software, and he tweeted 9 hours ago, "I'm so humbled by the support and comments for their Kickstarter campaign for Broken Sword Shadow of the Templars Reforged. Thank you so much for all of our amazing community. You make what we do possible." Which is true. The fandom of Broken Sword really are the people that allows Revolution Software to kind of rip off people by let's see. Both of these are warrior. Summon this. But yeah, Revolution Software kind of rips off people by doing Kickstarters when they really should have enough success. And then they're kind of just reselling the first couple of good Broken Sword games. Meanwhile, the slight changes that they've done to Broken Sword in the original version versus the deluxe edition and now this remastered AI upscaled, which let's also point that out too as an element, is that this is definitely an AI upscaled. Remaster that they're selling. So yeah, as much as I like the first couple of Broken Sword games, I kind of hate even the second game because there's just no consistent romance or narrative that seems to follow the two main protagonists. Like, sometimes they come off as they're slightly romantic, but a lot of times they come off as platonic friends. And so it's just a will they, won't they experience. And so, yeah, I really wish instead Broken Sword would try to make new games and get proper funding from proper publishers. Although we are now particularly in this situation where you really can't just assume that a publisher is going to support or fund the developments of games. But yeah, Revolution Software has been doing the Kickstarter thing. Double Fine has that same problem where they created a whole platform big just so they could eliminate the extra fees around Kickstarter to have people kickstart in the development of their games and other games. Let's see if locking this down does something. Just going around in circles here. Try and summon things higher. And there's so much that goes on through all this. Weirdly, I have yet to find a card in this deck that actually seems to do anything. Yeah, it doesn't seem to actually get any extra attacks or anything. I would say, in particular, to just spout this opinion and then move on, it is probably interesting to contrast, say, what Cyan, the creators of Myst, although has done, versus what Revolution Software has done. Even though the comparisons aren't really apples to apples, in that Broken Sword is a point-and-click adventure game, would have not been quite as popular as what it was at one time, one of the best-selling video game PC games ever, which Myst 1, like, really was one of the best-selling games out there. But yeah, Cyan has, to my memory, never done a Kickstarter, at least to remaster or re-release Myst. They've always been able to fund it themselves. Maybe they've been slow about it, but they've also just been constantly getting sales from Myst and having Myst on sale, which Broken Sword games should have always been on sale too, and should have been getting that constant income. Cyan, at least publicly, hasn't announced any kind of remaster that would use AI upscaling, which honestly, there's just no way that would even look good in Myst. And yeah, if Cyan ever did do a Kickstarter, it would have been probably for something like Abduction, a whole new game from the makers of Myst in a whole different universe and a different series. that is not directly connected to Myst. They've tried to publish and be a publisher for another game that didn't sell that well, and then most recently they came out with yet another game that I don't believe that had a Kickstarter around it either. At a certain point, the begging, e-begging through Kickstarter hurts your credibility and just makes it look like you're not financially sound to actually run your company, and it just doesn't look good. The same would be said for like Double Fine still doing fig projects or Kickstarter-like projects, and I don't think Double Fine really has done any Kickstarter-like projects since Broken Age, and that would have been before they were acquired by Microsoft. I wouldn't be surprised if Microsoft very much said, no, we're not going to let you do a Kickstarter campaign. Either we're going to approve the development of a game and fund it ourselves, or it's just not going to happen. The fact that you have the CEO here not even having a top banner also just kind of highlights the lack of good advertisement that he's doing. He's not really even promoting he's not even really promoting the Kickstarter until now, and then he's been quiet since July 3rd, 2023. I did hear some claims, and I don't know how much of I should really believe it, that Twitter itself may be dying very quickly as it's getting full of spam bots, which I think that's probably an exaggeration in the fact that Twitter was always full of spam bots. So I wouldn't have been surprised if not that much has changed. If anything, it does feel like to me that Twitter still is very much the place you go if you want to follow corporations and businesses. It's not the place you want to go if you want to watch video or talk to people. And Mastodon, Blue Sky, all of those are too complicated, really. So for your average user. So yeah, I don't think Twitter has changed that much at all since Elon Musk took over, at least as far as from the direction of users. Here we can show off the Kickstarter. $213,820 have been pledged on a $63,330 goal, which is a pathetically small amount of money to ask for in the first place. That definitely reeks of we're going to set a small goal so we can overshoot it. Even 200,000 though is not a lot of money to remaster a game. But yeah, they are just using AI generated improvements to, at least what they're calling AI art, to add a little bit to the edges to make it more widescreen in resolution and to just polish everything up. So a lot of what they're calling AI art here may very well not be true AI art. It may very well just be a case of running what would be effectively Photoshop filters over the images. Yep. Taking sprites like this and then running it through something closer to like deep learning super sampling to smooth and create pixels, compared to something like what we would generally describe as AI art, which is to take a still image and then animate something different here. This here, as far as character sprites, if you were feeding an AI art generator a pencil sketch like this and getting this out, that does feel slightly more generative as far as AI art. Although this comparison is pretty bad anyways, because the effect here is completely different. See how his mouth is just like wide open here, and it just turns into a smirk here. It's totally different. The eyebrow here does not raise anywhere as much as this does. So this is probably the first pencil sketch idea, not even really a keyframe, that led to this animation. And I doubt they're doing actual keyframe hand animation. Let's hop back into another game. We got one victory there. But it definitely is a case where I would prefer a new Broken Sword game that's good over just reselling the first Broken Sword game over and over again, because this is the third time that they are effectively reselling it. Here you can see the old art, and then it very roughly jumps to the new style, which doesn't even look that much better. But yeah. And inherently with any Kickstarter, how many people are buying and supporting the Kickstarter just to get all this merchandise, which selling and delivering merchandise is a nightmare as far as collectibles, versus people that actually feel like there's an actual need for yet another remaster. But yeah. The series needs to be rebooted. The most recent Broken Sword game had very poor point-and-click puzzles in it, and not a very interesting story as far as I can recall, because I don't remember any of it. So it might be more of a case where, very much like the Myst series, maybe Broken Sword should have just been sold to a new company that would have tried something different instead of the same company, Revolution Software, which is not doing anything revolutionary, so it's bad naming. But yeah, a new company might have done something different. Myst, in contrast, was handed over effectively to Ubisoft for Myst 3, 4, 5, and then 3 and 4, and then they came back, and the Cyan came back to make Myst 5, and Myst 5 was very weird, trying to, I guess, try something different, and that didn't work either. So it didn't really work either way, honestly. Yeah, I actually think, now that I think about it, it probably would have been better. Revolution Software probably did better by the Broken Sword series by trying to make sequels that are good, versus Cyan, which let Ubisoft make Myst 3 and Myst 4. Although, no, I can't really give the points there to Revolution Software, because Myst 3 and Myst 4 are actually decent Myst games. It's Myst 5 that's terrible. That really stands out as a completely different style of game. So, yeah. I'm talking in circles here, saying both things and trying to think it through. And yeah, definitely, had Revolution Software, after Broken Sword 2, handed it over to another company like Ubisoft, I think you would have had a better experience as far as Broken Sword 3, Broken Sword 4, and I think they made a Broken Sword 5. yeah. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that you've got to let go of your projects after 2 or 3 games in the game industry, and I think that is probably the case, because inherently you make 2 games, you probably spent like 8 years on that game. At that point, you're just going to be tired of making that type of game. You're going to be out of ideas. People don't really talk about the fact that a good game probably has ideas and elements in it that have been in the head of the creator for years, if not decades, previous. People may have been thinking of ideas and refining those ideas subconsciously for 10, 20 years in their childhood, in their early careers, waiting for the technology to get right, waiting for somebody to actually listen to them, or a good game to implement that concept into. And then once you make that first Bioshock 1 type game, or System Shock game, then it is a lot of repetition in the sequels because you don't have a lot of new ideas. And then you get Bioshock Infinite that did have a lot of ideas, but none of them could be implemented in. And then I wouldn't be surprised if Judas now, when it comes out, feels extremely close to Bioshock 1 or Bioshock Infinite and has very little new ideas. But yeah, artists only have so much art in them. It's the sad truth, but it is the case. And it's always been the case. Like, even famous painters spent a ton of time painting their masterpieces, but also spent a ton of time just copying other people's works and making multiple duplicates of their same paintings. And the apprentice of the master painters were spending many, many years just duplicating and touching up the master paintings, often getting no credit for that. But yeah, even extremely proficient artists, writers, and painters don't churn out masterpiece after masterpiece after masterpiece. You look at like the author of Stephen King, he's churned out a ton of content, mostly because of his alcoholism and cocaine addiction in the past, is where he churned out a whole bunch of books, but most of the books aren't that good. It's just that there isn't really that much competition, particularly around horror and sci-fi writing. Speaking of new ideas, new creations, Minecraft has a new snapshot with wolf armor. It absorbs all damage to wolves, I assume, until it breaks, protecting all 40 of your wolf's hearts. Wolf armor can be strengthened, has been strengthened overall, and it can be customized with dyes and repaired with armadillo scoots. Which, yeah. It's nice to see that Minecraft is still promoting snapshots and making new content. It is, though, very much a slow process as far as how it goes, as far as new content that actually matters. I'd say there is very much a case where a lot of the content that comes out from Minecraft is in snapshots are not interesting features. They've, I think, hit a kind of saturation point as far as redstone goes, and so there's no new interesting redstone developments that have happened for a long time, and new items to decorate or otherwise add some functionality or have limited usage. And yeah, I imagine we are just at the tail end of a generation of Minecraft fans. Now just getting slightly too old for Minecraft, ready to move on to Roblox or Fortnite or something slightly more mature. Maybe Palworld in particular. I guess I'm kind of bearing the lead here. The Pokemon Direct did happen. Well, really don't have a lot to say there. I watched somebody else's video of reacting to the announcement, which is to watch somebody watch the pre-recorded live directs from the Pokemon Company, and there's just, I think, still a lot of desire for the Pokemon Black and White games to be remastered and re-released. Those are, I believe, the only games in the series that haven't been re-released or remastered. They probably want them remastered. The biggest announcement was Pokemon Legends ZA, which from the name it kind of feels like it's Z2A, which is all taking place in a city called Luminous City, and from the teaser trailer it seems to indicate that you're going to probably start in a future and then go into a past. But comparing it to Pokemon Legends Arceus, the two games don't feel in any way really similar. And you are only in the city. You can't leave the city in the game, which means they're probably trying to eliminate having to render so much grass and open fields, and it might mean that you're just straight up not capturing Pokemon in the grass at all in the game. But yeah, Arceus had that very Japanese feudal feel to it, that it was set into like what would have been a Pokemon past before technology had evolved. And so that's what I would have assumed the Pokemon Legends series was supposed to be, is that it would just always be set in the past, and it would be a more Japanese focused environments and style, and would be the spin-off game. But yeah, it definitely feels like, since they did remake, what was that game series, they kind of remade Pokemon Yellow, it felt like, and remastered it at a newer art style, which it would have made sense then to move to Gold and Silver, the second generation, and remake those and announce those. Now, notably, from the Pokemon announcements, there was no mention of Palworld at all. There's no mention of anything coming to PC at all. They did announce a new Pokemon trading card game that's going to have better visuals for mobile. So they're relaunching what already exists effectively on that, and that's not a terrible thought, because I don't think the Pokemon trading card game is very polished. So that probably means that they are going to try and get a ton of microtransactions and card pack opening. They definitely showed a lot of card pack opening around the Pokemon trading card game. They didn't announce any kind of Pokemon World side-by-sides like Pokemon Nintendo World, which that could have been something that could have been announced if that was in pre-production. They didn't really say anything about a potential Switch 2 or anything Nintendo directly related, or really even platforms. I think they tried to mentioned that Pokemon Sleep still exists, that they didn't do anything as far as the online trading of Pokemon from different games, or that system. Nothing new to announce there. So yeah, fairly lackluster. One thing that is notable is that when they did show a protagonist, it is now the new Pokemon anime character protagonist. And they definitely are not mentioning Ash Ketchum or Ash's Pikachu in particular. So they're trying to move over to that new animation style, that new generation. And I wouldn't be surprised if the anime's switch in animation style is putting some amount of pressure on the animation style of the video games themselves, and that there is probably just an internal effort to improve the animation quality always. Oh, I did find out that my microwave has a sensor cook feature that I've never used before. There was always this like plastic cover, which I assume had some kind of sensor on it, but I've never actually been using it. You have to just tell it certain things from a menu, and it has like 7 settings. And so I was like, oh, this can actually do something. This is where I'm gonna lose. That was a mistake. Unless this can convince him of something. But yeah, I suppose if your microwave has a sensor in it, give it a try. I was able to take a frozen pork chop and label it as a frozen entree, and it was able to actually take a frozen pork chop and cook it pretty decently for a microwave, at least. It's not even something I think they really would encourage in that case. They would probably just want me to defrost the pork chop in the microwave and then finish it off in a grill or on a pan. Moving on back to video game news though. The Last of Us director Neil Druckmann says he doesn't think he has many more big games left in him. Naughty Dog's boss says everything has become incredibly stressful since Uncharted 2's release. I can get that, certainly. And arguably, maybe that's the way it should be too. If we weren't around the concept of there must be a boss and there must be a director, it would kind of make more sense. And certainly capitalism creates that idea of there must be a boss, and we must create this class system and this divide where there are the people in power and then there are the peasants who are never going to be in power. But yeah, it would kind of make a lot of sense instead in a video game company to say who has an idea, who is most passionate about it, who wants to pitch this idea, and who let the programmers and the developers of the games, the artists, the writers, all vote, equal share vote democratically, and whoever's game pitch is most popular, he's just going to be the director for that project, and he's just going to be in charge of his baby to make sure it becomes as good of a game as possible. And maybe you would have just a manager over the director to do day-to-day business stuff, but having more of a flat democratic process would probably lead to more creativity. Of course, it can't really work that way in a capitalistic system, because what really happens is somebody, probably the manager, the permanent manager of a company, has to make a pitch to a publisher to get the publisher to fund the development of a game. And so his pitch to the developer is always going to be around the basis of, first and foremost, the game is going to sell as much as possible and make as much profit as possible. So then he's got microtransactions and DLC and just playing to making a very generic video game that has been shown that it would sell over and over again, and you get the generic first-person military shooters over and over again because of capitalism. Whereas I don't think any game developer out there, or any team of game developers out there, would say, let's make a generic, boring first-person shooter. We're so close. Even if I lost 2 more times, I would get this 200, so we'll stick with this. But yeah, creative director, which is, I guess, what you would call it, should probably only work on 1 or 2 games. Maybe 1 game, then take a whole break on it. Uncharted in general, Uncharted specifically, is not a game series I've played, but it definitely feels like it is a game series that went off the rails and got a lot of pressure from Sony, which will have more stories around that. And yeah, there definitely was a point in which Uncharted tried to stop focusing on the main protagonist, Nathan Drake, in favor of completely different characters, which that's not really going to work unless you're just going to make a spin-off series. So it looks to me, we did link summon for 50. I don't think it's worth trying to synchro summon 6 more times. And then we've done everything else on the festivals, and we have 40 minutes left. So I'm really cutting it to the last second there. Then we got all the daily quests done, and we got the login quest done. And today is the end of the month also, so it doesn't make any sense to play ranked. We will just end the month here at Diamond 5 and then, or Platinum 5, and then we will fall down to Gold 5 starting next month. And this is probably this being the shortest month of the year, this is the one month where that's probably the most acceptable for that to happen. And then hopefully next month maybe we could have a few less festivals and maybe get to Diamond 5, which is my goal, which I've never reached. Of course, I'm not really rebuilding decks or doing anything to have that actually happen. Alright, so now we'll just go through the news specifically. TT Games, in a surprising move, is listing that they are looking for some hires. Certainly they're giving some lip service to being conciliatory to all the people who have lost their jobs recently. This does highlight something somewhat interesting. We haven't had a Lego game or other kind of TT game. We haven't had another type of TT game in a long time, but we haven't had a Lego game really announced. One would assume that maybe they're going to remake the Indiana Jones games, but they're kind of late to the party if they were going to do that. And they already remade Star Wars. So who knows what the next Lego game really would be. At this point they could remake the Lego movie game even, because the Lego movie itself I think is about 10 years old at this point. They did promote and retweet this Innovate Her, getting girls ready for the tech industry and the tech industry ready for girls, which they are still doing that in Black History Month. Well, I'm not really seeing any posts at all from Black History Month, so they chose not to endorse that. But what this mostly shows, though, is that with AT&T's acquisition of WB, and WB owning WB Games, and WB Games owning TT Games, we haven't seen any massive layoffs, and I think that is worth pointing out. It's been long enough now, and we certainly are in the season of layoffs, that if AT&T was going to announce layoffs, there's a decent chance they already would have. Now, I may be proven wrong tomorrow, and we may have AT&T shut down significant portions of WB and WB Games and TT Games in general. But yeah, so far so good, and I guess that's the most comfort you can take in the video game industries. No news is good news. It does look like they're hiring. They did describe them as LEGO game developers exclusively. There have been some LEGO failures as far as games recently, in that the LEGO Drive from EA, which is not a TT game, didn't really catch anybody's attention, and the LEGO characters in Fortnite haven't been really talked about since they've been announced. So I don't imagine that Fortnite's going to support that concept that far. LEGO itself has gotten really expensive over the past couple of years, and I think the attention is waning. Also, they haven't announced anything majorly interesting in a while too. So, and we'll see what these Zelda LEGO sets are when they come out. But yeah, the Mario Brothers LEGO sets weren't really interesting to me, and I think interest has waned on those quite a bit as far as the Blockheads Mario play sets go. But yeah, one company is hiring. Another company that's hiring is NetEase, hired a veteran Call of Duty designer to lead a new AAA studio. Increasingly, it does seem like people who want to start their own companies need support financially, at least, and they are turning to places like NetEase and Tencent to get those finances, despite the fact that there has been concern, to say the least, around getting in bed with Chinese-based companies like NetEase and Tencent, and there has been direct issues, I think, in the past with getting into bed with Tencent and NetEase. But the Call of Duty veteran designer is David Vanderhaar. He spent almost 2 decades at Treyarch, but now he's going to take charge of a remote-first studio called Bullet Farm. Remote first as a concept for video game design makes a lot of sense. There is, I think, an argument. This is a funny logo, but whatever, that doesn't matter. There is a concept, I think, in game development, though, that you would want to get people together, probably on a weekly basis, in person if possible. You at the very least would want people to get face to face and kind of have group meetings, groupthink meetings, creative meetings. There is still major problems with teleconferencing, despite how good you might have your teleconferencing software, as far as just talking over people, allowing people to feel at ease to not contribute as much and just sit back, and people losing their connection and just not being in the same room to react to people's faces and reactions. Game development and design very much is creating a game for the people in those creative meetings, which often is part or all of the creative designers in a video game company. You're really not making a game for the audience. You think you are, but first and foremost, you have to get your coworkers on board. Otherwise, your coworkers aren't going to want to work on the project at all, or they're going to do a crappy job and just do the bare minimum. And just being face to face and interacting with people can be very helpful. Now, being face-to-face with people and interacting with people occasionally leads to also somebody pushing, shoving, or taking a swing at somebody, or people getting drunk, which I never encourage alcohol at work personally, and flirting with each other, or people sexually harassing. So there are a lot of benefits to have the vast majority of time actually be remote on the HR side. And certainly you could intimidate and bully good ideas out of the development process in face-to-face more than you can remotely. But then 90% of the time, once you have those creative meetings done, everybody is just in a cubicle sitting next to somebody else, not really talking to that person. I could see where programming would help if you have a couple people working together. The idea of parallel programming, in which you have one person spend an hour developing a concept and programming it, and then the other person is just sitting there watching them type the lines of code and giving suggestions. And I think the idea is you have one person talks and the other one actually types, and then you switch and then for an hour, and then the other person types and talks. And I think that works when you're getting the initial code. Eventually, when you get down to we need to optimize this code and we need to improve it, that's where one-on-one coding, I think, is better. And one of the things about parallel coding is that it has some rules that you don't just, when it's your turn, go back and change the other person's code if you're not talking to them and they're not coding it correctly and they're not getting how you want it coded correctly to the appropriate style guide regulations. Then you just move forward. But yeah, voice actors and voice booths are very much just one person and maybe a director, which can be done over remote. Artists, almost 100% done solely. Parallel art doesn't exist as a concept, where one person would describe what they want drawn and then the other person would draw and then you'd switch. That would look awful and be very inconsistent. Writing doesn't work particularly in parallel. One person writing one paragraph and then switching, and then another person writing a paragraph wouldn't work. Usually most games have only one writer in the first place. And QA very much can be remote too. Like you don't need two people playing one game at the same time. So yeah, outside of creative meetings, that maybe you have a get together once a week and have a pizza party and do your creative meetings, then have a pizza party at the end. That's about it. And once you have all the ideas locked down, once you technically are in beta, that you're not adding any more features, the real definition of beta, not what video games use as the definition of beta, you shouldn't really need to have creative meetings at that point. Not scheduled ones, at least. You might have an emergency one if you want to make major changes. But once the idea of what a game is going to be is locked in, and you are just in beta and you're just bug fixing, that can be almost 100% remote. So yeah, I do think we will increasingly see jobs become remote in all industries, but particularly in video games, where it's very doable. It's still very impossible to be a trucker driving 18-wheelers and doing that remotely. There is actually some thought to that idea, where multiple 18-wheelers would be controlled automatically by some remote driver in some facility. But there's really not any real good reason to implement that. You might get to the point where we have trains of 18-wheelers on the highways being driven by one human in the lead car, the lead 18-wheeler in front. But I think states would probably demand that there be a worker behind a driver behind the wheel in case of emergencies, always. But who knows what's going to be in the future. And then packing packages for Amazon and shipping, that is not likely to be remote because the technology to replace shipping packagers at Amazon has already been starting to show up with just full-on robotics and automation, and they're just going to eliminate those jobs. And yeah, remote is very preferable to a lot of people who can get remote jobs. That almost everybody likes it, except for managers who then can't justify their job because they're not looking over the shoulders and finding people to yell at or give orders to. But it doesn't really address the fact that automation is coming and it's coming fast, and jobs are just going to disappear. And that's a good thing. We have enough resources in a lot of countries, not all of them around the world. Getting automation gives more free time to humans to do more creative human things or just live better lives of leisure. But the only solution to that is with automation, we probably are going to need to just tax the heck out of companies that use automatic methods and create some kind of universal basic income, or just print money and create a universal basic income, which would be about the same, because as you continue to print money, the value of the money theoretically goes down. So you're making an indirect tax by inflating or deflating the value of a dollar or whatever currency your country uses. But yeah, that's the only thing that's really going to solve automation, is we've got to just create a new society that is not based on a working class needing to work, and probably isn't based on the idea of exploiting the working class to make rich people richer. I saw an article on Reddit. In particular, it seems like Bernie Sanders is making a proposal. He talks a lot, but nobody really is going to listen to him, around taxing 100% of income over $1 billion, which would be nobody if it's actual income. It would be probably about 10 people if it was gross revenue per year. And frankly, it doesn't matter if it's nobody at all. Just creating that rule, that tax bracket, and setting that precedent will work fine in the future as rich people keep getting richer. But we're supposed to be talking about video games, so let's move on. OBS put out this kind of retweet emergency thing here. The NVIDIA GeForce hotfix driver 551.68 is now available. Apparently, if you're using the INVEC encoder, which that is NVIDIA encoder hardware encoding of video, which is better than just like H.264, and I don't know if OBS can even do H.265 encoding, but if you were trying to encode videos, it was leading in corrupted videos and error messages on the GTX 1630 and the GeForce GTX 1650 and the 1650 Ti GPUs. So yeah, I did notice that the GeForce Experience was once again trying to have me download a new driver. Now I don't have any of these I don't have any of those video cards, so it probably wouldn't have affected me. These are pretty lightweight video cards in the series 1650. So I imagine you're not going to be encoding very good video in the first place with this, but you had been receiving the INVEC area get encoded packet area. Meanwhile, OBS is pushing out betas for version 30.1. in February was their last little bug. You should be on version 30.0 for a stable experience. And I think I am on that version. I'm not 100% sure. If anything, I'm trying to go a version number behind, particularly if a major version update like version 30 in software isn't really adding anything as far as that I would use. New and easier read status bar, it might be nice. WIP WebRTC output would be something I'd have to investigate to see if I even could use it or would use it. Intel encoders for Linux is not something I would use unless I was going to try and move my whole computer to Linux, which doesn't make sense when playing video games, unless I'm going to try and just run something like Chimera OS in a Steam Deck equivalent OS. Application audio capture is something I do want to transition the way I do audio to that. It eliminates the need, it theoretically would eliminate the need of using something like the Banana software to create virtual audio devices to send certain applications to one audio device and certain applications to another audio device. But yeah, it's going to take a lot of work to do that. It may very well be a case of reinstalling Windows would be the time to move to application audio capture. And then a new virtual camera for macOS 13 Plus, a safe mode crash recovery, RTMP IP version 6 might be helpful if you were going to stream video or receive streaming video inside your home network. Just upgraded versions of Qt5 and FFmpeg and Ubuntu support. Yeah, no major new feature there, and it would be kind of hard for open broadcast software to introduce a new feature. The number one feature right now, which I'm doing, is multi-streaming. If OBS had a way to have multiple chats up and stream with one launch of the application to both YouTube and Twitch and potentially Facebook Live, and if it could just do all of that for free, that would be great. It can do that, but also it probably needs a benchmark, a network test software to tell you if you can actually handle that kind of bandwidth, and just a hardware test benchmark to say if you can actually, your hardware can actually handle streaming to multiple sources. But yeah, that would be the one feature I'd like them to implement. And then I don't know what else I'd even really want. There's a ton of stuff I do with Advanced Scene Switcher as a plugin for OBS, but it's all such advanced custom stuff that I don't know if it would benefit your average OBS user. I would say an easy mode for OBS would probably be nice to get new people into it. It might be used to have more of a hotkey dashboard somewhere where you can add buttons for hotkeys or on the main screen. The way they by default lay out OBS when you first launch it is fairly different from the way I have it set up too, so I've really customized a lot of that to the way I want it. Moving on, Ubisoft and Keywords have apparently failed to credit Skull and Bones translators. It definitely feels unwarranted and demotivating not having my name in the credits, which, yeah, this has been a consistent problem, and I'm glad that at least GameDeveloper.com, and I think in general the video gaming communities and average gamers are increasingly trying to put pressure on developers to stop intentionally uncrediting people or messing up with credits, it is not hard to get credits right. There's just a bunch of nonsense being played here. The major nonsense around credits is them intentionally removing people from the credits if they did not work on the game or continue to work for either Ubisoft or Credit or Keywords when the game, up until the point where the game is released. They are withholding credit as a way of trying to force employees to stay working at a bad job situation, what might be a bad job situation, until the game is released. And in the day and age in which games can be updated, at some point we are going to have a story where some jerk company is going to retroactively remove somebody from the credits because they quit their job after the game was released. Whereas, obviously, the right way to do credits, and there really should probably be a law on this, is that if they worked for even a fraction of a second on the game, they should get credits. Credits can be super long. They're already way too long for most gamers, and most people don't sit through them. Only 30% of players even make it to the credits. So just make them long. It's better for just to make the right moral decision there and just credit everybody. Even if they don't want to be credited, even if they somehow are actively trying to force their names not to be credited, they should be credited. It doesn't really hurt anybody to say, hey, you worked on this game, when you actually did work on the game. That's just telling the truth. And it doesn't really even help people to have the credits in the game. At some point, somebody should make an IMDb-like service that is heavily built around people who worked on video games and credits, so that you could follow that one creator, or more likely you'd follow groups of creators who worked on certain games, and figure out who you actually like or might prefer as far as their creative output goes. If you had, say, a musician who was the drummer for the Beatles, and then he left the Beatles and then formed a different band, and then he left that band and joined a different band, and then he left that band and joined a third band. If you really like that drummer, you should be able to know who that drummer is and be able to follow his career. The same should be true for video games, even if in reality the drummer in the Beatles may just be part of a collaborative effort that makes a band called the Beatles that makes the music you like, and maybe his drumming isn't as synergistic in the second band, and so maybe you wouldn't really like the music he makes in that second band, and you may not like what he makes in the third, but it should be at least the consumer's choice to follow the people who worked on collaborative efforts, not a corporation's ability to, I'm not going to say right, to intentionally uncredit people and hide their creations. But there is a question certainly as to how do we put more pressure on game companies that do this, particularly in the case of Skull and Bones, where people are already not going to buy that game. I heard that the number of people who went back to play Black Flag has spiked like 200% after the release of Skull and Bones. And Skull and Bones has an early, like, free to start element to it, so it definitely feels like a lot of people have played Skull and Bones in the free part, felt it worse than Black Flag from many years ago, and gone back and played Black Flag instead. Yeah, and inherently I don't think Skull and Bones is making any kind of argument that it offers anything new compared to Black Flag, which is a much older game that inspired Skull and Bones. This is an interesting story from Video Games Chronicles. Apparently kids are facing bullying over in-game items and skins, a study is suggesting. And yeah, this report commissioned in Norway suggests young people are feeling pressure to buy online game cosmetics. Alright, Yeah, I was thinking it was the other way around, and that's what confused me. I definitely have heard stories of kids being called, I forget what the word was, um, some default or something like that, in that their character doesn't have any cosmetic skins, and inherently that's the whole point of skins, is to make you feel bad that you haven't purchased in-game items or cosmetics. And kids games really should not have microtransactions and cosmetic purchases in the first place. And it really shouldn't have microtransactions in the first place. So this is yet another study saying that seems like that's being the case. Yeah, the pressure to fit in re-symbols what is already taking place in other contexts but takes on new forms. Some children might end up feeling excluded if they lack resources, e.g. Wi-Fi, gaming equipment, in-game currency to play with their friends, and might get picked on. Seems like a lot of this may just be speculation. They might get picked on based on what skin they were wearing. Inherently, this probably has happened. I don't think, though, it's happening that often. From whatever I can tell, it seems like kids around the world these days are just increasingly very sweet and kind compared to what they would have been in previous generations. They're definitely not growing up hard, which is a good thing. But yeah, this is the kind of survey that I think makes a lot of sense to increase the idea that in-game purchases should not be allowed for kids in the first place. I mean, kids don't have money, so you shouldn't be advertising to them for in-game purchases in the first place. But apparently parents do. They just hand over V-Bucks or Robux or whatever the ones for Roblox to their kids, and they're buying something. This is a great example of a very young kid that probably shouldn't be playing any game with microtransactions as far as the picture goes, and I would have to see the screen as far as what game he's really playing here. At a certain level, though, this is also kind of not news. It's already been known that kids would make fun of kids who had cheap Walmart shoes or torn up simplistic clothing, things like that, and they've been excluded. And it's already been very much known for decades that as consumerism expanded and expanded, more and more kids felt pressure or excluded to dress the same and all have the same toys and all of that. And so taking it into a virtual world is really just showing how more and more things are becoming digital. But yeah, there's really only one solution to this, and it's just not allowing kids games. If kids are allowed in the game, they can't buy microtransactions, and the game probably shouldn't. If kids are allowed in the game shouldn't be allowed to have microtransactions. Moving on, apparently a ransomware gang has claimed to have hacked nearly 200 gigabytes, which isn't really that much space, of Epic Games' internal data, although 200 gigabytes excluding game data would be quite a bit. The update here from Video Games Chronicle says that Epic has responded saying that there currently is zero evidence that the claims are legit, which may just mean that the ransomware game is really good, or that Epic is playing some semantic games here and saying, well, you the news source, Video Games Chronicle, have zero evidence that the claims are legit because we're hiding all the evidence. What would they really get? It claims to have compromised the email, passwords, full name, payment information, source code, and many other data amounting to a total size of 189 gigabytes. The data is also for sale. They say they're investigating. They say this hacker group has not contacted them or provided any proof of the veracity. In a weird way, if they're a ransomware group, they're really doing the wrong thing here as far as trying to make money. Like, if you had hacked this data, the first thing you would have done is contacted Epic and said, we have this data, pay us a certain amount and we'll delete it and never go public about this. That's the ransom in ransomware that you would have. Then if the negotiations broke down and Epic refused to pay, then the hacker group would probably come out and say, we contacted them and asked them to pay us and they refused to pay, so now we're selling this data publicly. That's always, if you're doing it right, which it's a wrong thing, so you shouldn't be doing it in the first place, but the second step would be to sell it publicly. And the information, full names and passwords of Fortnite accounts or Epic Games Store accounts might be very useful, although it may not be that useful at all if the vast majority of Epic users are just getting free games on the Epic Games Store and have never even put in a credit card number, which is the case for me and I think the vast majority of people who have used the Epic Games Store. I have seen that it looks like security on the Epic Games Store seems a little weak, and certainly it's a nail in the coffin of the Epic Games Store if several months down the road everybody gets an email that says your information has been breached. Like, nobody's going to have confidence to shift from Steam to the Epic Games Store in that case. In the same amount of time that the Epic Games Store has existed, there have been no hacking breaches that I recall of at Valve and Steam, so that in comparison looks very solid and safe. The Life is Strange sequel studio Deck 9 has laid off 20% of the staff. Execs, directors, and leads are also reportedly taking pay cuts, although that is not equal to say, oh, an exec may be taking as little as $1 a year pay cut, meanwhile 20% of the other staff of the associate level employees are being completely fired. That is extremely cold comfort for the people being laid off. On the other hand, if there was ever a company that probably should pivot in some way, and in this case that would include potentially layoffs, it would be the Life is Strange companies. This is Deck 9 is behind Life is Strange Before the Storm and Life is Strange True Colors and the Telltale series The Expanse, which I think they expected The Expanse to be way more popular than it actually would. None of these games have done particularly well. The Life is Strange series itself has been really, really poorly handled in that it definitely should have just been a game where you followed the main protagonist from the first Life is Strange game into further adventures with her and her friend, instead of trying to reintroduce new characters every sequel and make some weird anthology series that is also a little bit too SJW-y, so it's losing half of its potential audience to start off with. It's also losing a significant number of gamers by being what is effectively just a simplistic point-and-click adventure in a 3D world in which you're just deciding dialogue choices and actions on very rare elements. That being said, if I was to say Life is Strange True Colors, if I was to take that And if I was to compare that to the most recent Broken Sword game, I imagine the most recent Broken Sword game could have looked 3D like Life is Strange True Colors, and it might catch a slightly bigger audience. But then I would also imagine that the writing of Life is Strange True Colors might be slightly better than the writing of the most recent Broken Sword game, which I think would be Broken Sword 5. That being said, the most recent Broken Sword game in the series probably cost a mere fraction of what it costs to make Life is Strange True Colors. Inherently, though, I think Life is Strange game developers needed to keep themselves extremely conservative in what they were making and not try to be that ambitious. They also needed to probably pivot and make slightly different styles of games, be a little bit more diverse in that, or if you're going to keep the same style of games, try to go more like Telltale, where you have different types of stories being told, which that didn't really even work for Telltale, but I think it probably worked better for Telltale than this did. Unfortunately, that is the problem with a lot of these layoffs, is that the companies that are announcing layoffs, it makes a lot of sense. These companies haven't made great games in a long time. I'm getting a little concerned here with the new CEO of YouTube, in that he retweeted this YouTuber with, let's see, 258,000 followers on Twitter, and his video how he customized YouTube headquarters. They made a special visit to YouTube headquarters and left him with some awesome artwork. Thanks again for your all the amazing murals. So maybe this is a special shout out for getting free artwork on the walls. But yeah, my concern here is so far the new CEO of YouTube has not been like Susan Wojcicki. He hasn't tried to rub elbows with celebrities, and he really hasn't tried to pick and choose winners as far as who he wants to be popular on YouTube or who he wants to rub elbows and hang out with on YouTube. I hope he's not sliding into that idea. Also, they've expanded the beta program for their new app, YouTube Create, which is a cell phone app with a lot of video effects and things like that to just create videos on the fly on your cell phone and not even need a computer, PC, which it's very much the comparisons to like Instagram and TikTok in those kinds of videos that you could just make on the fly. You're never really going to get to the level of quality that you're going to have highly polished, nicely designed videos being created on a cell phone. And it uniquely is useless to anybody who's going to be talking about either video game news like I am now, or playing video games, because you're just not going to be able to capture that footage on your cell phone. I did see some project, and I didn't pay enough attention to it, of making a separate stream box that would just not require a computer at all. That concept is interesting, but then I think I pretty much dismissed it, because unless it was a separate stream box that was running, say, Linux and would let me run OBS on it, it just wouldn't have all the extra features you would like. Although you could potentially have a streaming box that would just handle the streaming and encoding, and then have the video out of your gaming PC go to that streaming box. And that is the future, certainly, is if you could get a relatively cheap, something around $500 or less, streaming box that also was an audio encoder, so you could plug in an XLR microphone into it and like a touchpads to maybe do some effects, and yeah, if it was like the Rodecaster Pro, which they at some point announced a Rodecaster Duo, and the Rodecaster Duo is still fairly expensive, but it probably is the right move compared to the Rodecaster Pro, which has like 5 microphone inputs. The Duo has like 2, which, yeah, or at least it has 2 faders. It might have more inputs than that, and 2 faders might be the right amount to save some money there. Of course, I can never justify buying even the Rodecaster Duo because it's too expensive, and because my microphone will probably never break unless I spill water on it or drop it, and it's attached to a stand, so it dropping and being significantly damaged is very unlikely to happen. So my Blue Yeti from probably 10 years ago still is working perfectly fine, and yeah, it's not intelligence to replace something with some when it's already working. Moving on with the news, Cloud Emporium Games has reportedly laid off an unknown number of staff due to restructuring at the Star Citizen studio. Was that really the article I was gonna talk about, though? Yeah. Also, Respawn's unannounced Star Wars first-person shooter has been claimed. Ridgeline Games, which was working on a single-player Battlefield experience, is being shut down, so that's probably the end of single-player Battlefield. And development of next Mass Effect continues, with BioWare's focus currently being on Dragon Age. Then Remedy said that Alan Wake 2 has helped put them in a strong position. There was a quote here that this was the right time to go back into live action video with Alan Wake 2, and that seemed like a weird quote. Also, this is weird how Twitter is showing this to me. It's like showing me one story and then the comments on that one story, and then it's like advertising it. This is probably my ad blocker going a little wild. But yeah, we can move on from that. GameDeveloper.com says Polaris Design Retreat Papers is exploring a colonial-free design, prioritizing frameworks and more. I don't know what that really means as a sentence. Designers across the industry dig into designing games from empathetic players and how to evoke suspense and discovery in game design. This is a pretty rough highlight. The phrase colonial free design in particular, does that mean that it's just a game not built by any colony somewhere? Any colony of England, any colony of the United States? Or I guess it would be any colony of the British Empire. Or if this means something completely different. Yeah, you sometimes get this where there is headlines or stories and you just I don't even know what they're talking about. 4 design focused reports in the year of 2023. So this is a promotion of the Polaris Game Design Retreat. And I guess if you're a game developer, you might understand this more. But if you're actually a gamer, I think this information is probably absolutely useless. So let's move on. Here's the same story. EA has canceled Respawn's Star Wars first-person shooter. Studio will now focus on Jedi games and Apex Legends games. Which is funny because they just put out a remastered version of Star Wars Dark Forces, which is a very old Doom clone style first-person shooter in the Star Wars universe. I tried to cover some of those games, but man, that's very rough. Very large maps, you just have to wander around. Even in a remastered state, it's not a very good game from what I've seen of other reviewers. I watched another YouTuber who's more of a specialist in playing first-person shooters, and he sings the praises of the remaster at the beginning of the video, and then he just points out that the game is pretty bad based on its original form, which it was pretty bad. Yeah. Even trying to go back and like cover Doom, I don't have anything new to say if I was going to cover the original Doom game, which maybe I did do a spotlight around it before I played the Doom reboot. Whereas the Doom reboot is a very playable game, and at some point I should get around to playing Doom Eternal. Even at that though, Doom and Doom Eternal are not really games that are for me. They're a little bit too challenging, and they definitely are built around the idea of fast-paced twitch, probably mouse and keyboard, arena shooting, and I'm just not that big of a first-person shooter gamer. If I do want to do first-person shooting, it's probably never first-person, it's probably third-person shooting, and I want something that's somewhat slow and simplistic like Resident Evil 4, or I want something that might straight up just be like Fallout, where you're just using the VAT system to target things, and you're never really supposed to just dry fire a gun without using the VAT system in Fallout. EA also closed the Battlefield single-player studio original games. Same story here. Criterion will be the now lead on the next campaign, so I guess they haven't fully eliminated the idea of single player. Now, this news, I believe, comes just a few days after the announcement of one of the higher ups at the Battlefield companies leaving. Yeah, Marcus Rydo recently made a personal decision to leave the project to ensure their work continues uninterrupted. We must immediately appoint leadership at Criterion to oversee our single player work. So the guy leaves, and then there are layoffs. That's almost certainly not a coincidence. He either saw the layoffs coming and didn't want to take the blame for the layoffs, or he was part of the layoffs, but he's a manager, so he's given extra privileges to leave on his own and not just be listed as a layoff. Or he totally was against the layoffs, and the second he left, somebody came in and was totally for layoffs, which is also very possible. And it could be just a total coincidence. That is also a possibility, but it's unlikely. EA is also going to spend over $125 million laying off 5% of its workforce in this sweeping restructuring plan. Although inherently, you once again get into this issue. As a gamer, everybody hates EA. They don't make interesting new games. They put all of their focus on just microtransaction laden sports games. And so the meme for years has always been that EA sucks. So if 5% of a sucky company gets laid off, you might want to be sympathetic and say, well, that 5% of employees might have been the good employees, and this might be the 95% of bad employees at EA are staying. But it might be the exact opposite. The truth is probably somewhere in the exact middle there, that 5% of employees that have no effect on how EA actually does its business are being laid off. This doesn't feel like EA is laying off enough people that they would actually change how they do business in any way, and that they would start putting the right people in the right place to actually make good games and make new games. And it doesn't feel like they are getting rid of enough people that they might just stop making as many games in the first place. EA is probably sitting on a pile of money. So I don't think any company that is sitting on a pile of money really has to ever evolve in any way. And it is probably a case that EA is a great example of why corporations maybe shouldn't be allowed to sit on a pile of money. And if they are always hungry and they're always trying to develop things, they would maybe experiment a little bit more. EA owns, I believe, quite a few intellectual property licenses for games that it is doing nothing with. So that too is something that if they had more financial pressure, they probably would dip down into their back catalog and make new remasters or re-releases. And then Electronic Arts as a name is insulting because nobody really is going to make the argument that they are making great artistic creations in the games they do make. Of course, EA also may very well be a company that is going to just fall to the wayside as we increasingly are just going to get mad at Microsoft and Sony and Nintendo for being bad companies. Yeah, it is very much just crabs in a bucket where everybody is pulling everybody downward in quality and the way they run their businesses. Here might be another example of that from GameDeveloper.com. Nintendo is gunning for the emulator Yuzu with a new lawsuit. With Yuzu in hand, nothing stops a user from obtaining and playing unlawful copies of virtually any game made for the Nintendo Switch. The question in my mind is Yuzu one of the emulators that has an encryption key built into it, or a BIOS code built into it, something that would be actually copyrightable by Nintendo? Or is it a full white box emulator that would be perfectly legal? Emulators have been proven time and time in court to be legal, from what I understand. There's perhaps this complaint here from Nintendo where they're claiming the Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom was unlawfully distributed a week and a half before its official release. And it says some of those infringing copies were compatible with Yuzu. Well, that really has nothing to do with Yuzu, though. And then they're saying Tears of the Kingdom was pirated a million times. It seems like this lawsuit may literally just be a long excuse from Nintendo as to why Tears of the Kingdom didn't sell as well. But I could make a counter argument that Tears of the Kingdom didn't sell as well because they released it at the wrong time and didn't advertise it enough. Also, sequels are unlikely to sell as well as the first game in a series, and Tears of the Kingdom wasn't offering a lot of new content since it's the exact same landmass, and there's just no real gimmick other than the Hand of God gimmick of making mechanisms, which was too complicated. Nintendo is stating that there's no lawful way to use Yuzu to play Switch titles, and claims Yuzu creator Tropic Haze LLC has done manifest and irreparable harm to its business. Well, actually, if you make the argument that it's irreparable, then the courts have an argument to toss it out in the United States. At least this is probably a Japanese lawsuit that's all being translated from Japanese. But yeah, if you can't repair the harm, then the courts say, well, then we can't give you any verdict that would satisfy that damages, so we can't pay out damages, so we're not even going to waste our time on this court. You would want to say significant harm, not irreparable. They're seeking a permanent injunction against Yuzu, and meanwhile, this just brings Yuzu, an emulator that I've never even heard of before, to the forefront of my mind, and so now I want to just go download Yuzu and make sure there's a copy easily available to me. It's also seeking statutory damages, which again, they're just really trying to, I guess if they're doing DMCA, this is a United States lawsuit. Um, yeah, I'm not even sure Yuzu or its team are based in the United States, but one would assume that there's some claim of jurisdiction here. But yeah, very much this is the Streisand effect, whereas Nintendo would have been better to not waste their times on these lawsuits. They're definitely trying to make examples, and it's just not really working. Unfortunately, the one example that probably has worked is how they somehow figured out a way to get a actual human being thrown in jail for piracy, which is very much a civil crime and a financial crime, and should not ever lead to somebody being thrown in prison. The United States is not supposed to have debtors' prisons where you might be found guilty for like a civil reason and then owe money to Nintendo, and thus you can be thrown in jail because you don't have the money to pay Nintendo. Yeah, that I think has been ruled unconstitutional. But somehow, copyright and lobbying from people like the ESA, which Nintendo is a part of, has allowed copyright DMCA claims to end up with people going to jail. Whereas in this case, it does seem like even if Nintendo wins this lawsuit, which I think most people are hoping they don't, that they're just going to get some kind of judgment against employees or the Yuzu team, and then all of them would owe Nintendo such a significant amount of money that they'd probably never see it in their life. Meanwhile, Nintendo, with the Streisand effect, is making Yuzu way more known, and it just makes Nintendo look less popular. And if anything, this is what Nintendo of America exists for. This is the number one reason that Nintendo of Japan doesn't just ship games directly from Japan and have almost no office at all in the United States. Nintendo of America is established in the United States to give precedence and legal protection to Nintendo of Japan in the United States, and to file lawsuits on the behalf of Nintendo of Japan. So, if you think you like Nintendo, or if you think you want to work for Nintendo of America, this is what they do. They localize games and they sue people. They don't really make games. Not a lot of them. Maybe every now and then you get thrown a bone to work on some project as a second party developer. But that's not why Nintendo of America exists. Here is the NVIDIA hotfix driver being promoted again, and NVIDIA customer care, we already talked about that. And then there was something Gamatsu had here. I think we probably have already talked about all of this. Oh, there was this interesting thing where Gamatsu points out that the PlayStation Store for this game, Metaphor ReFantagio, is up in Japan and Asia. But then there is a weird screenshot inconsistency they're pointing out. Whoever takes the screenshot really went for every level of saturation from left to right. Here's the PlayStation Store in English. Here's the PlayStation Store in Japan, which definitely is more colorful, and that may be intentional. And then here is the Microsoft Store in English, which is definitely more colorful and less saturated. And so either this is a case where they are straight up, I mean, this has to be intentional nowadays. If this was an old game, there might be a reason why the colors would be different and it would be in a different color range. But in modern days, the colors should be exactly the same. The screenshots should be exactly the same. The only thing I could guess is if this wasn't intentional, they probably gave a screenshot from an earlier point to the localizers in English, and then had people like fake the localization instead of actually having a game screenshot. Or they just change the screenshots when they change the language to English. This is something we don't see in screenshots usually, is that there's just a difference in there. Sometimes it does definitely feel like, though, they try to make it more colorful for the Japanese audience and more brown and realistic for the English audience. Another thing they're pointing out here, as far as just bad screenshots, is that in the Japanese versions you have barrels in the background here, and in the English versions there aren't barrels, which that seems really inconsistent. Which again, maybe that means the Japanese screenshots were taken much earlier and then the English screenshots were taken much later. Insomniac Games also had some layoffs. I think that's pretty much all I want to talk about, though, directly from Komatsu's Twitter. Yeah, Insomniac calling this week's layoffs a, quote, solemn and unprecedented moment. I don't know how you say it's unprecedented, but it is worth pointing out that Insomniac Games is owned by Sony Interactive Entertainment, which I call Sony of California at the moment because it's being run out of California. And this does highlight that the development of first-party exclusives from Sony and PlayStation are being less focused on, and it's pretty obvious that that's been the case for a while. They laid off 900 employees worldwide. The move will include staff to the Spider-Man studio Insomniac and the Last of Us developer Naughty Dog in the United States. And we also have stories as far as the Last of Us company. So, I mean, the Uncharted company. So those are like 3 of the major games from Sony: Last of Us, Uncharted, and Spider-Man. So unless Sony is going to try to sell its units exclusively from third-party games, which maybe that's their plan, or they're going to bring in different teams to make first-party games, which probably wouldn't be too terrible thought. But nobody wants to see Spider-Man games get worse. Nobody wants to see Last of Us games get worse. Nobody wants to see Uncharted games get worse. I would still like to see a new Uncharted or a reboot of the Uncharted series. I'd like to see Last of Us maybe pivot and make a Last of Us 3 that gets better received. I'd like to see actual competition from Sony from its first-party games at least. Otherwise, you are going to have this weird situation in which Microsoft is really going to feel like they have no competitor, and then very quickly I think you're going to see Microsoft make even fewer games and worse quality games. And at a certain point, we might have this soft collapse that would happen where Microsoft and PlayStation just kind of give up and make minimal efforts in the game industry, and it is just going to be a whole new generation of third-party developers that become popular and successful, or a whole bunch of indie developers that become popular and successful. Texas Chainsaw Massacre netted 5.6 million players as Black Tiger apparently is taking over development, which that's a big number for a game that I really haven't seen advertised that much. Sega has subtly implied that Super Mario Wonder, without actually naming Super Mario Wonder, was responsible for Sonic Superstars selling less than expected, which is probably the case, but I think it also was the case that Sega knew when Sonic Super Mario Wonder was coming out and could have released their game later or earlier to avoid the conflict there. Definitely feels like it's sour grapes, and it definitely feels like this is just a case of Sega either having too high of expectations for Sonic or just not doing particularly good around Sonic. we still are very much at the case where there are more bad Sonic games than there are good. So it's going to be a while before they dig themselves out of that hole and establish a good level of quality of Sonic games and consistency with Sonic games that would rival the almost 100% record that Mario games have. If anything, I'd say Mario Wonder probably didn't sell as well as Nintendo would like, so in contrast, had Super Mario Wonder sold as well as, say, Super Mario Odyssey had sold, then Sonic Superstars would pale in comparison even more. Let's see. We already talked about the Call of Duty Black Ops veteran Dan Vanderhaar announcing a new NetEase studio. So all the military first-person shooters basically seem to be shifting people around, which probably highlights how military first-person shooters have not been doing particularly well in recent times. We already talked about Insomniac Games having layoffs. Let's see. Remedy has gotten Control's full franchise rights from 505 Games. Seems like a weird issue there. I guess this is your standard situation where the publisher makes a contract with the developer that says the publisher has to be paid back for all the money plus profit on the sales and development of a game before the rights go to the actual developer of the game, which is kind of an insane system, because if you were to take the same idea and try to apply it to owning stocks in a company, that would be crazy. Like, it would effectively say, well, mortgages are effectively the same thing. You don't own your house if you have a mortgage, the bank owns your house. And you don't own anything really from your house until you pay off the mortgage with interest. That is, I guess, what a publisher is doing, is saying you don't own this game until you pay off the loan we gave you to develop the game and all the money we spent to advertise the game with interest. So there definitely are contracts like this. The difference there being a house is not thought of as being a creative franchise, a creative element that you're creating from. So it's just thought of as a physical piece of property. Now, arguably, if you are a homeowner, you take care of the house, you decorate the house, you do take some ownership of it, but you probably didn't build the house from scratch. So, although you could certainly get a mortgage to build a house from scratch and be a construction person and construct it yourself, and then it would be the same kind of creative element. But particularly in digital forms, there probably should be some kind of moral rights where video game companies can't lose 100% of their creation. It is kind of crazy that 2K owns the Borderlands series, and so if 2K took Borderlands away from Gearbox could do nothing about it, and 2K could have a different company make Borderlands games and sell and make tons of money on Borderlands games, and Gearbox would never see a penny of that, even though Gearbox is the company that made Borderlands, programmed it, and made it popular and supported it for so far quite a few years. Well, this actually is not even happening until December 31st, 2024, so it's at the end of this year. Which that's not even what the headline says. It says in the past tense, gets. So, yeah. At that point, Remedy is going to be able to self-publish a Control 2, which, yeah, they probably will try to do that, but probably not on January 1st, 2025. They'll probably wait a while. Meanwhile, if they never got the franchise rights of Control, they can just focus on Alan Wake games or more Alan Wake spin-offs. But the idea of moral rights probably do need to be discussed and debated more as far as how that should play out in the United States and around the world. That somebody who is creative, who creates something like Control, shouldn't be allowed to own 0% of it. It's a debate that's been happening for a long time as far as just comic book creators. A lot of terrible deals in the past where somebody creates a comic book character and then that comic book character becomes Superman or Spider-Man and is super popular, and then the original creator for that concept is often uncredited and definitely underpaid for all that work, or for that original idea that everything is being derived from. And if you're not going to argue for moral rights and owning some small percentage and getting a revenue, some amount of money from derivative works, then the copyright system should just go the other way and say derivative works are fine and copyright shouldn't exist in the first place. Which maybe that is the easier way to do it, is just get rid of copyright in all but very limited ways, and then anybody who makes Control would be allowed to make a Control 2. Everybody in the world could make a Control 2, and there would be no copyright laws stopping people from doing that, making derivative works and fan sequels and things like that. And maybe that's the way the laws should go. It's almost certainly not the way the laws will go, but it is certainly a counter argument to moral rights. Just say nobody has any rights to an idea, and once an idea is set free and in the public, it just belongs to society. Which, yeah, that would work too. If Spider-Man issue 1 had come out and it was just immediately a public domain character like everything else, and Marvel and DC and any fan could make Spider-Man comics, that would be fine. We are certainly seeing with Steamboat Willie and Mickey Mouse, a character going into public domain in modern times isn't leading to a massive flood of Mickey Mouse fan stories or fan animations or anything like that, at least not yet. Speaking of Mickey Mouse, Warren Spector, who made Epic Mickey 1 and I believe Epic Mickey 2, said he'd love to make an Epic Mickey 3, but his current job prevents him from doing that, so we probably aren't going to see an Epic Mickey 3. I don't know if there's really that much demand for it. Deck 9 Games, developer of The Expanse, also laid off 20% of its staff. We already talked about that. The Final Fantasy boss Kitase explains why he didn't quit when his mentor Sakaguchi left Square Enix. Kitase directed Final Fantasy 6, 7, and 8 before Sakaguchi's departure. There's, I guess, a full explanation here. I don't think in Japan, even if you have a mentor, there is this feeling of loyalty to a mentor over stupid loyalty to working at a job. And only very recently, in the past couple of years, have we started to see Japanese people actually be willing to leave their jobs and form their own companies, or just leave their jobs in general. It has been up until this point very much the case that you just work as a salaryman at a company until you die or retire, whichever happens first. And yeah, this kind of loyalty doesn't make a lot of sense. You can be loyalty if they've got a good pitch and if they want to take you with them, or if you might discuss or offer that. But it probably creates a lot of job instability, certainly to move to a new job. And I'm not sure the way Final Fantasy games in particular are directed and made, that it works for there to be any more than one person in charge of the creative decisions in the first place. So if his mentor was at Final Fantasy was working on Final Fantasy games also, he probably wasn't making any real decisions, and he was probably just following the wishes, or what he believed the wishes of Sakaguchi was. With Sakaguchi stepping down and leaving Square Enix, that creates a opening for Kitase to actually make his own decisions and go in different directions, which is a rare opportunity in Japanese business, I imagine. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Kitase eventually leave Square Enix, as I think a lot of people are eventually going to leave Square Enix, or Square Enix is going to change how it does business, whichever happens first. The game Bolotero has made $1 million within hours of its release. We already talked about that. I should also mention that my clips program seemed like it worked last time, but I made a stupid typo. So it didn't put a carriage return at the end, just an enter, basically. So I ended up with a file that was just one long single line with no carriage returns, which is not going to work. I could have manually gone in there and fixed it, but it's not worth the time. But I am making progress on the clips programming, although to no real reason. The clips from the first video that I did make clips on have all gotten 0 views. That being said, if I looked at the first 100 clips I put, YouTube shorts I put out, they also got 0 views. Meanwhile, now I'm getting about 25% of my views from YouTube shorts. At this point, I could never give up on the YouTube shorts. I might be able to evolve YouTube shorts into something else, but that is just going to have to be a thing forever. So hopefully I'm not irritating too many people on YouTube shorts. The Pokemon card illustrator, this is from Video Games Chronicle, says he feels in danger from autograph hunters and ambushes. This is Naoki Saito, says he won't sign any more autographs until it settles down. Now what's funny about this is, I guess nobody really gets trained on this, but it should be fairly easy for anybody who's an illustrator or anyone who's creative, a book writer, things like that, to simply have it be known fairly publicly that if you send a self-addressed stamped envelope to the person's agent, he will sign or give you a photo, a signed photo, for free. Some people definitely do signings at conventions and charge. But yeah, in the old days that was very much the case, and there definitely are people who do signature collecting the right way, in which they have they just send self-addressed stamped envelopes and whatever you want signed, or you just ask for a signed photo or something like that. And then a lot of times signing is done with an auto signer anyway, so nobody is actually signing those. It's just done with a machine, but by it being done with a machine, the signature looks the same always, so you can then authenticate that it actually was quote-unquote signed by that person. Whereas if they're signing it with just a Sharpie at a convention, the signatures might change a little bit. A lot of signature fans, which collecting signatures is a weird hobby, but whatever, want photos with them, with the person signing, to kind of prove and memorialize the signature, which that can help somewhat on authenticating a signature. It does all build around the idea that signatures are worth something. This is almost certainly, in this case, more of a Japanese thing, where the Japanese people think that Japan is pretty much safe enough that they could walk up to an illustrator and ask them for signatures. It's being sought by collectors and resellers. Which, yeah. The real thing here, though, is to just say, send your Pokemon cards you want signed to my agent to this PO box. You don't actually say it's your agent, but send it to this PO box with a self-addressed stamped envelope, and we will sign it and mail it back to you. That creates a lot of barrier from you being physically in the same room with somebody who might be crazy, while still satisfying the fandom quite a bit. The other way you could do this certainly is you could say, well, signatures seem to be so popular around Pokemon cards that we should have just a signed series of Pokemon cards that they sell. Certainly you could take packs of Pokemon cards that don't sell that well, older cards, and just have them be signed and then repackaged and then sold at a much higher price. But yeah, people do like signatures, they do like photos, and that is part of the thing about being a celebrity. In this case, this is a Pokemon card illustrator, which in Japan technically does rise to the level of celebrity, but it is also the kind of job where the card illustrator, I'm sure, didn't really think that he was going to be a celebrity originally, or she, I'm not sure whether it's a he or she. No, it says he. He is also potentially whining about him feeling like he's in danger, where he's probably not in danger. You're going to have some creepy people in Japan, but you're not going to have knife-wielding lunatics that much, and you're definitely not going to have gun-wielding lunatics. So, yeah. Trying to claim victim status because you are super popular falls fairly flat as a claim, particularly when you can significantly reduce the interaction as far as if they just want signatures. You can sell signatures, you can sell signed cards, you can sell signed photos, you can have them sent out for free, and there's a better way to do that. And that's where something like this is the kind of situation where if you're that popular, you should probably have an agent who knows how to advise on this. And I think agents never were really that good, but I think they may be getting even worse these days, as you just have people claiming that they can be agents and doing absolutely nothing that an agent should be doing, and then taking a percentage cut of your revenue. Here we have GameDeveloper.com's twist on this, where it says Sony is reevaluating PlayStation Studios and cutting 900 jobs. Insomniac, Guerrilla, and Naughty Dogs, and more key internal studios are being downsized. Here's the Pokemon Legends Z-A. It's set entirely within this luminous city. You can see it's being shown as this kind of futuristic wireframe city in part, and then sometimes you see it as kind of a old pencil sketch architecture design. And so you just have these 3D blobs, which I imagine that just shows how early the development of this game is. 3D models of Pokemon in what looks like the Matrix. I wouldn't be surprised if you actually never see this in the game. There, I think, is supposed to be some kind of mystery you're investigating around it, but yeah, the city is going to be bigger than it was in the original game, where Luminous City takes place. Yep. It would have been part of the Kalos region, which featured 16 cities in the original X and Y games. It showed what I think is a Mega Evolution Stone, and introduces the idea of Mega Evolutions, although I don't know how Mega Evolutions would really play out in a game that is just based in an entire city, kind of based on Paris. So yeah. So very early announcement, and just not anything like the other, like Pokemon Legends Arceus at all. It does seem like the Legends name seems weird. You'd think it would be set in the past, and I think some of this will be set in the past, but it doesn't seem like all of it's set in the past. I don't know what they're really going for here at all. It's just so early. And then there was a Pokemon trading card game Pocket announced for iOS and Android, due out in 2024 worldwide. And that trailer very much was showing you swiping your finger to open card packs. It also was showing the gimmick here of immersive cards, where the art starts as kind of a static image here. Let's see if we can just show this. Starts as kind of this glowing static image, and then you, I guess, maybe could swipe around the card, and then you've got just an immersive card that just keeps moving and keeps moving deeper and deeper. Although this really is just a new way of attempting to have a animated style to a card. So it just kind of does a circle around a much deeper area that has many layers. Although weirdly, I would have thought you would have wanted to just make live 2D images, and they have opted not to do that. You're not having Pikachu bounce back and forth or move, which, yeah, they seem to be stubbornly unwilling to use live 2D, either because of licensing or because of programming. And that inherently, I think, is the problem with any of these Pokemon game announcements, is that I just don't really trust the Pokemon company to make good games. And immersive cards are going to be one thing, but the vast majority of Pokemon cards are just going to be new scans, new animations based on the print cards. I wouldn't be surprised if this might be a step in the direction of reducing the number of actual physical print trading cards that come out and that get sold, as I imagine fewer and fewer people actually want to play with the actual card games, as much as they could pivot a big portion of the audience to digital. There's a lot of savings around not physically printing cards and not shipping them to comic stores or card shops, or putting them in Walmarts where they're going to get stolen quite a bit. Yep. You can actually play the card game in Pokemon trading card games, but you would be forgiven if you didn't actually get that message in the trailer, because they really only spent a few seconds actually showing the gameplay of the Pokemon card game, and they're definitely not emphasizing that at the moment. We already talked about PlayStation Studios laying off people. There is a rumor that Multiversus may be returning soon. According to McDonald's Australia, the fast food chain is promoting an upcoming Multiversus Happy Meal toys. So I guess WB took down Multiversus, or only launched it in some trial betas originally, and that probably is the right move, because if you're going to make a Smash Brothers clone using only WB properties, well, you're going to be fairly limited on the characters you can use, and you're really going to have it come out strong. And I believe that the last time you could play Multiversus in beta, the selection of characters was fairly limited, and depending on what generation you are, you may not really recognize a lot of the characters here. I think this is Steven Universe, I think this is Steven Universe, this is Adventure Time, this is Adventure Time, this is Bugs Bunny and Tasmanian Devil, and this is Scooby-Doo. This girl might be from Avatar: The Last Airbender, but I don't even know if WB owns that. And then this is the Iron Giant from a movie. if we go back up here, we can recognize Batman. Yeah, I don't know who this character is. And Superman from DC Comics. You'd think DC Comics might play a little bit more of a role. Wonder Woman, you just have Trinity here. So, yeah. Warner Brothers do have a lot of old cartoons. Certainly they could lean on, but it's not a lot of recognizable characters. Let's see. Properties including DC Comics, Looney Tunes, Cartoon Network, Game of Thrones. Oh, so this is probably from Game of Thrones then. Which that's oddly inappropriate, I think. Gremlins, Rick and Morty, and Iron Giant. Rick and Morty not really being kid-friendly either, so inherently, by including Game of Thrones and Rick and Morty, you're saying Multiversus is for adults, and a Smash Brothers game for adults that really kids shouldn't play does not make any sense then if you're going to throw in Adventure Time and Steven Universe and Bugs Bunny. The two types of age groups contrast. Almost certainly, though, I would also point out that Video Games Chronicles should not be using McDonald's Australia as a source of video game news. That very well could have just been a made-up announcement. It might also be a case where Warner Brothers is thinking of promoting the idea of multiverses, not as a video game, but as just maybe a brand and label, that this would be the place where Warner Brothers characters could interact in a non-canon way, and they could make TV series, comics, whatever, movies, in the idea of multiverses, and it could very well be Into the Spider-Verse equivalent for Warner Brothers, which wouldn't be a terrible thought, frankly, if they just ripped off Into the Spider-Verse and had Warner Brothers characters in a Lego movie type crossover movie. Which, yeah, I doubt Warner Brothers is doing something like that, but it would have definitely been a project to think about. Here's that story from Video Games Chronicle. Warner Spector would love to do Epic Mickey 3, but says his job makes it impossible. Warren Spector directed the first game and says he's happy to see it being remastered. Warren Spector was also the creator of Deus Ex. And I may still be working at Crystal Dynamics. Everyone on the original game, as well as the Purple Lamp and THQ Nordic teams that worked on the remaster, did a great job bringing it to life. Yeah, he'd love to, but he doesn't think it is possible under the current circumstances. Triquel, interesting phrase. Instead of calling it a threequel, you call it a triquel. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how well Epic Mickey Rebrushed really sells and is received just years later, or how well Mickey in general sells. I almost wonder if the fact that Mickey went into public domain convinced Disney to allow the remaster of Epic Mickey 1. But there's a lot of stuff happening in Disney, certainly, and Disney has been floundering to figure out what it should be doing and what it shouldn't be doing. And in part, without getting into any politics around Disney, they really do feel like they failed to create anything in the past couple of years as far as movies, and it's been a long time since they've made any kind of Disney animated movie, something as big as like Cinderella. That they really should just have a big 2-hour movie that would highlight what animators at Disney, if any animators even exist at Disney still. I think they mostly fired them and replaced them with cheaper foreign workers, could do. Even if they were just going to continue making live action remakes of their animations, at least that would be something, but they've pretty much given up on that too. They've been so over-focused on Marvel movies to the point of oversaturation on Marvel superhero movies, they dropped the ball. They should have taken some of the profits of like the Avengers Endgame and said we should have a side project that is just an animation. Even if it was just an animation around Marvel characters, probably would have made some sense to take some of the sillier looking Marvel movie characters and just make a cartoon based on that. Make an Iron Man movie, that cartoon series or something. Komatsu says Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth series ports are coming to the PS4 and Switch. Switch versions are due out on May 23rd in Japan. The Neptunia series in particular has just kind of rebooted and resold the same games so many times that it's hard to tell whether Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth 1, 2, and 3 are remakes of any games, or if this is a rebooted version, or if it's kind of a little bit of both. But yeah, it still does seem like it's got a fairly strong audience, at least in Japan, for as many games as they've made and released. Let's see, what was this Twitter thing? Wrestling video game. Lead gameplay designer for WWE 2K. I think, yes, he weirdly is looking for a job. 3D character combat developer, which, okay, seems like 2K themselves would just have promoted that instead of the random person they retweeted, random employee, seems like. For all I know, he's in charge of it, though. Let's see. There's another job listings. Certainly we're starting to see people list and make job listings. I imagine it just takes like a month or two to make a job listing and get it approved by HR. And that's why we're starting to see these job listings. Also, it may just be we're close to the end of the first quarter, so by the time they actually hired somebody, you wouldn't be paying anybody until you're into the second quarter of the year. Yeah, they have a large number of open roles for this company. There's No Moon, a new independent AAA development studio. It's not There Is No Moon, it's That's No Moon. That's a Star Wars reference, now that I think about it. So I guess now would be a good time, if you're determined to work in the video game industry, now would be a good time to start putting out applications. Also saw that it seems like increasingly there's less demand for here's Deck 9 also talking about their layoffs. I like how Deck 9 here has everybody being displayed as your banner. It does highlight some weirdness with the different colors, and that you have this whole gang of gray shirts over here. And I wonder if it's like different color shirts for actual different roles in the company, or if it's just random differently colored shirts. It seems like that's a little weird to have so much variety in color and shirts. Perhaps it is in part to have you overlook the fact that when you actually start look at the faces of all the characters at the company, it is a lot of bald white guys, a lot of white guys in general. let's play a little bit of games of who could even possibly be minority. This guy in the back might be a minority. This guy in the back might be a minority. This guy might be a minority. If you include women as minorities there, you've got a woman here and a woman here. This guy might be a minority. That might be a minority. There's a woman. There's a woman here. You have a guy wearing a hat so you can't even see his face. I think this is a hat also. Woman and a woman. A woman. A woman there. Woman there. Woman there. So, yeah. A smattering of females, or female presenting people at least, and then a heck of a lot of white guys at your company. So maybe this is the reason why you don't see that many people listed as showing their entire employee roster. But yeah, people who look the same get treated the same, particularly in the same country, in the same place, same locations. People who get treated the same end up having very similar ways in which they have lived their lives, have been raised, and how they think and believe on certain topics based on the way they've been treated. And that creates a lot of groupthink, and it doesn't create a lot of diversity of thought, which then creates less possibility of having interesting ideas, new ideas for video games or any other development of a story. And particularly when you're talking about Deck 9, they are basically just making Telltale games based on The Expanse, which is not something they wrote. So The Expanse as a Telltale game looks exactly like, I imagine, and plays exactly like every other Telltale game, with nothing new or creative being added there. And that was kind of the problem with the original Telltale company, is that the games became very samey, and the only time they did get anything creative or interesting in Telltale games is when they hired out multiple writers to actually write the stories for like the Walking Dead games. And even at that, the stories weren't that were kind of exclusively good to the Walking Dead games and not that interesting from other series. GameDeveloper.com also says PlayStation is shutting down the London studio amid the mass layoffs. They've been working on a new franchising and is still advertising job openings on the website. Unity is laying off about 25% of its staff. Well, Unity saying that it laid off 25% of its staff was about reigniting revenue growth, which, yeah, I don't think that's going to work for Unity. I think Unity will be a dead engine 10 years from now, as fewer and fewer people are willing to put up with the internal power moves that are being made at Unity, that are now being made very publicly. And it probably is a great example of how a company cannot just secretly and silently lay off a bunch of people without it getting reported. Video game journalism has gotten a lot better lately on making sure that gamers know when a company is doing something shady or when it's laying off a bunch of people, if you follow the right news sources. In fairness, though, the vast majority of game developers, I mean gamers, not game developers, the vast majority of gamers are not following video game news and couldn't care less. They don't have time in their life to care about the drama of a company like Unity and whatever it's doing. They just want to play the games they want to play and have a little bit of entertainment and relief from their stressful day-to-day lives. Here's that story I was talking about before. Alan Wake 2 was the quote right time for Remedy to invest in live action video, says the actor Sam Lake, I believe. I don't know if I really think really that is true. Like, but also I don't really have any major interest in playing Alan Wake 2, so I'm not really the target audience for Alan Wake 2 anyways, so maybe it is true. It seems like the vast majority of Alan Wake, this is a fake band I think they made up for Alan Wake 2 called Herald of Darkness. Feels like the rest of Alan Wake 2 is very much realistic animation, but still animation, and so you can't really promote the animation and say, oh, Alan Wake 2 looks so pretty, and also say, well, we also did some live action footage too. You can't do both. Usually when it's a case that a game has live action footage, that is specifically because it is being made a little bit cheaper in a way that would save them some money by just putting live action footage instead of trying to animate things. And I am not getting anywhere at all with going faster today. So let's very quickly, as best as I can, show off the games from the last stream that I'm going to consider putting on the fall list. Those first four were yes. This is seemingly a Korean only game. We've only seen 2 or 3 of those that I recall on Steam. I do think we're increasingly going to see Asian only language games get released in competition with the kind of large number of Chinese only games that I'm intentionally excluding. At a certain point, it would have to be Japanese only language games that I would exclude as the next thing to be filtered, and there would just have to be so many of them, and or the quality of the Japanese only language games would have to be incredibly poor, like the Chinese games are. And at some point, if we start to actually see Chinese games that are good outnumber, or at least compete with the number of terrible low effort asset flip type Chinese games, then I probably should at that point remove the exclusion that I have, because it is a little unfair to just by default exclude all Chinese only language games. Although I could probably save myself some time and be more fair if I only was looking at English language games. It wouldn't save me that much time though. 1,000 out, it's probably about 1,001 games are released on Steam for every one that doesn't support the English language. So that wouldn't really save me a lot of time. I did see in one of the YouTube shorts that there was a pop-up that said if I signed into my account through the OBS web browser that I'm using. This is weird. And it looks like an interestingly slightly different animation style. There's just absolutely no text even here. I'm gonna put this on the follow list and see if there's something here. I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't. Nathan Morgan dilemma, that might be something. Crowd control VR. There's another game called Crowd Control, I believe, but it didn't look this bad. So that's gonna be a no. This is just some kind of text-based game. So that's not gonna get a YouTube short. So I guess maybe Steam is changing how the age gate warnings go. Although I don't think they legally really can change how the age gate warnings go. There's too many laws in like Europe and such that says if it has like an ESB M for mature rating, you have to prevent them from even seeing the page without asking the age at first. And signing in or being signed in is seemingly not good enough. Give this a chance. This is an interesting twist on Minesweeper. I don't know if that really changes that much to kind of just pivot it. It would come down to, I guess, if you put shapes here where the Minesweeper was touching fewer sides. And I guess that's the case here. No, that's still 4 sides for each of these shapes. So this is going to come down to, can I find one piece that is touching 3 sides only? Something that would be a triangle, effectively. Or 5 sides. I'll take 5 sides too, because that would change things. No. In these screenshots I can look and see that while they are twisting the squares, it is always touching 4 sides, which means while visually it may look different, it's going to play exactly the same as Minesweeper. So I'm going to say no to that. Now, if they'd taken it to the point where they had 5-sided pieces and 3-sided pieces, that would be an actual logical twist on the game. But it would also potentially cost a lot more. And see, this is already on the fall list, and I need to start deciding whether certain games deserve a second YouTube short if it's already on the fall list. And in that case, I'm going to say no. Although it really wouldn't help me too much if I was signed into the OBS web browser to make the YouTube shorts, because that would just increase the odds of me making a YouTube short based on an adult game that YouTube would get mad about, and I don't really have any good reason to risk a deletion of my channel yet again for some nebulous community guideline strike. This is getting ridiculous as far as the hidden series of games. Nobody needs to be putting out that many hidden games. I don't think anybody's buying them. I'd hope nobody's buying them, but still they're getting put on sale. Yeah, a lot of people sing the praises of like free market economies and that supply and demand will create good products being available for sale and bad products will go away, and it's just not really the case. There's a lot of cheap bad products that still exist, and there's plenty of companies that make bad products and just shove them in the face of people that are new. So maybe you could make the argument that supply and demand works over a long enough period of time, but at a certain point you're going to have to prove that even capitalism works on a long enough point of time, large enough scale, and maybe it doesn't matter if it works on a large enough scale when in any individual's lifetime it doesn't work for people. But yeah, Steam is particularly a great example of that. You have a massive supply of bad games, relatively low demand as far as games people actually want to buy and play, or just the general desire to buy and play a game. almost would say yes to this, but this is just a weird meme game now that I look at it further. In contrast, if supply and demand was true, we would have extremely few games on Steam being released, and they would all be fairly high quality games. Yeah. And that is, I guess, completely also ignoring manipulation, where people are just buying their own games. Interesting. Here you have an educational game that teaches about self-managed abortion. I imagine this is something that would get me in trouble with YouTube. And I don't know if there's some trick here around taking something like a Plan B pill, which I don't think most people would call taking a Plan B pill actually an abortion. I don't think there is anything in the United States, maybe in other countries, as far as any kind of other abortion things. Maybe the pill that women take. Maybe if you take the pill at the right amounts at the right times, that would do something. But yeah, this would definitely get me in trouble with YouTube if I tried to cover it. But it is probably something every female should know about. Whether or not they're ever going to actually use that knowledge. See, that's weird. Today we have ended up with very, very few games that have made it to the short list of making YouTube shorts on it. 7 games. Now, I find that fairly surprising. Yeah. But I guess maybe that is in part because not that many games came out over the weekend at the end of February. So we can look at SteamDB one sec. Let me close some straggler tabs here. There we go. So we can look at SteamDB. Helldivers is a little bit lower. And then Palworld is continuing, I think, to go downward. This game Lost Epic. Where are we with Lost Epic now? The ratings, I think, are going up, but it still seems to be around 71% as far as it is. The reason why Lost Epic seems to be super popular at the moment is because it is making a direct argument against Diablo 4 as an action RPG game. That's what I think they're describing them as now. But yeah, seems like they're working on the servers and maybe slowly growing their fandom. Grand Blue Fantasy is moving downward, or at least maybe maintaining its 18th position. I definitely would think Grand Blue Fantasy Relink is more interesting than Football Manager 2024, but clearly there's one type of audience, me, who would be interested in something colorful and action-y, and then there's a different type of audience who would be so into playing soccer or football and being the manager that they would be playing a spreadsheet game. As far as my chart goes, we see here that Palworld has now dropped down below Naraka Blade Point. Helldivers is falling downward again. Apex Legends is going up, and Lost Epic had a spike and went down. So we're seeing some things trending downward on Wednesday, which is probably not that crazy. And then we can look at Steam. Dueled is right at the top. Lost Epic Epoch is here. That's the top seller. We'll check that page. They're doing this Steam Dinos vs. Robots Fest, but they're not even doing a full page takeover for that. And let's see. Anything particularly interesting on sale? Yep. Still very much feels like it's the same old, same old. So it does seem like there is just this. There's this game, Slay the Princess, seems to be getting more coverage than I would thought it would have been. And then this game too. This game called Nothing is a top new release for some reason. And then a Momodora game. Look at that too. Top new releases for January. This seems like this is a new shelf. I don't think I've ever seen top new releases. And yeah, it definitely feels like it might be a case where if a game is struggling with its player base, they may just not bother to advertise it, or it may very well be a case where it might be a case in particular where the games get promoted and then they stop being promoted. Like we had to go all the way here to top sellers to find Helldivers 2, and Steam Deck is in the second spot. So yeah, now would be a real good time to buy a Steam Deck because there is unlikely to be any major new announcements around Steam Deck for a while, and the Nintendo Switch 2 is not really being thought of as coming out before 2025. So yeah, if you're planning on buying two handheld devices in the next 12 months, buying a Steam Deck now would make a lot of sense. Here we have Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons remake getting only 52. Let's see what the reception is on this. Never played the original but heard incredible things, so I decided to buy the remake. The game itself is actually pretty good and I enjoy the creative, but the performance of this remake, at least the Steam version, is horrible, constantly getting under 50 frames per second with 100% GPU usage on my $2,500 machine. Performance was not good for me. The game has no settings to adjust. Really badly optimized, struggles to maintain even 30 frames on the Steam Deck, and graphics don't look good. Very big bug where I walk on the troll. Two sons slowly sink into the troll's back. Game unstable, crashes, not playable. So we have a very buggy remake, which I had hoped we had hit a point, particularly when you're talking 505 Games as the publisher. I had hoped that we would not see any of these future games that are remakes that are also just terribly optimized and buggy. Why put out a game that nobody really was even clamoring for a remake of if you're going to do a bad job of it? Meanwhile, you have almost the exact opposite situation here, where you have a remake that's seemingly very good and being well received at 84%, but the actual core of the game is a problem. There is also an argument to be made that more people should be complaining that you're not getting a discount or a full free update for the remastered version of this game if you owned the original version of the game. Yeah, I think people who have bought and played Dark Forces, the original version of the game, are going to probably be hard pressed to really want to spend another $27 to buy a remastered version of the game. And that is a fairly high price for what this game is. But I guess maybe there is enough fandom out there. This Momodora Moonlight Farewell is doing very well. And Liz Fang is mostly positive, although not a lot of reviews. Hasn't been out that long, so I almost wonder if this might be. This is more of a hack and slash game, I guess, than an action RPG game, though. So it might play slightly different. Slay the Princess is overwhelmingly positive. This visual novel seems like it's gotten some real fandom, which is surprising because it's not like you really have amazingly consistent art styles or really good art or even very colorful art. Like, some of this you could say is artistic intent, but some of this also just seems like it's somebody who's not that good at drawing compared to some of the other styles. Like, this face in particular compared to this face is just completely different. And I assume the story and the twist here is that the princess is some kind of horrible monster and you have to kill her for some reason. And then here's Last Epoch, getting up to 65% now, and overall it's 73%, so it does seem like it might be going in the right direction, so I'll put that on the follow list. Alright, well, we're not at the end of the show yet. We're gonna try and now do the YouTube clips, and fingers crossed it's actually going to work today, and we'll go through the headlines, and I'll continue to train myself to do that. And if we finish somewhat early, I guess we won't end up going too late in the evening. Alright, so Video Games Chronicle news stories. Here we go. Sony has announced March's PlayStation Plus Essential Games. Halo co-creator is taking time away from games after leaving the Battlefield director role. Last of Us director Neil Druckmann says he doesn't think he has many more big games left in him. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's physical Japanese release has the wrong labels on each disc. That's a kind of big mistake. Call of Duty Black Ops veteran David Vonderhaar announces a new NetEase studio. Sega implies Super Mario Wonder was responsible for Sonic Superstars selling less than expected. Kids face bullying over in-game items and skins, a study suggests. A ransomware gang claims to have hacked nearly 200 gigabytes of Epic Games' internal data. Life is Strange sequel studio Deck 9 lays off 20% of staff. Nintendo says the latest Zelda was pirated 1 million times pre-release as it sues Yuzu emulator creator. Horizon Studio Gorilla is reportedly cutting 10% of its workforce. That's about 40 staff. This story slipped through the cracks here. And unfortunately, this is yet another one of these stories where you have to admit that Horizon Forbidden West did not sell that well for one reason or another, so them laying off people is probably the natural outcome of that, or the outcome of that. Maybe it's not so natural. But Also, you imagine the 10% of people being laid off are probably not the right 10% of people that would help turn Horizon back into being a series people would actually want to play. Moving on, I guess. Skull and Bones Season 1 has launched. Spider-Man actor thinks Insomniac isn't done with Peter Parker. EA has revealed F1 24 ahead of its release in May. Pokemon card illustrator says he feels in danger from autograph hunter ambushes. Sony reportedly canceled Twistle Metal live service game as part of the layoffs. So apparently they were going to make a live service Twisted Metal game. If you were going to make a live service game, Twisted Metal probably is one of the types of games that would make a little bit more sense to do that. Yeah. Weirdly though, this just kind of feels like Sony is canceling everything. And we'll see what happens. Otherwise, or it may be a case that Sony is canceling all of the Western style games and we're just going to see a lot of Japanese Eastern style games come out of Sony once again, or maybe for the first time. Pokemon Legends Z-A is set entirely within Lumio City. Pokemon trading card game Pocket is coming to the mobile this year. Pokemon Legends Z-A is officially coming to Nintendo Switch in 2025. One of March's PlayStation Plus Essential games has leaked. PlayStation Studios says it's re-evaluating how we operate, confirms canceled games. Some of these headlines, I'm really just going to burn through them, I'm realizing, just because I just don't care about them. Alright. PlayStation is cutting around 900 staff worldwide, around 8% of its entire workforce. Multiverses may be returning soon, according to a McDonald's of Australia. Today's Pokemon Presents live stream is 13 minutes long. Watch here. Probably shouldn't have made a clip around that one because that one's already passed. These are older articles at this point, and that's absolutely irrelevant to make a clip around that. Warren Spector would love to do Epic Mickey 3, but says his job makes it impossible. Final Fantasy boss Kitase explains why he didn't quit when his mentor Sakaguchi left Square. WWE 2K24 Season Pass DLC wrestlers revealed, including CM Punk. Sakaguchi, in that last article, may have actually left Square before it became Square Enix. Yeah. So this is that music guy with all the tattoos on his face. He's going to be a playable character. I don't really know who this guy is or this guy, and I assume these are all wrestlers. Yeah. I don't think CM Punk is actually physically able to wrestle these days. Also, CM Punk may have been one of the people who got in trouble for assaulting people, which, yeah, wrestlers assaulting management, management assaulting wrestlers seems to have happened quite often in both the WWE and other wrestling events, wrestling federations, I guess is what you call them. There's nothing really in this season pass though that catches my attention, and I would think like this girl and this girl should just be on the default roster and not being added later. Yeah, several of these guys, if they are wrestling today, feel like they should be on the roster. Let's see if I recognize anything here. Post Malone is the rapper. I don't recognize any of these other names. I recognize Paul Heyman as a Superstar card. I recognize Diamond Dallas Page and Iron Sheik and Mr. Perfect and Lex Luger. Maybe even the Great Muta. I recognize the name. So yeah, that doesn't really feel like a good collection of characters that you would absolutely want to buy the season pass or get the DLC from. But maybe that means that the base game has all the characters you really would want. Although I still don't have any faith that WWE 2K24 would be more enjoyable to play or just less buggy compared to any of the previous WWE games. So let's move on. Arrowhead teases exciting Helldivers 2 plans after resolving server issues. Stardew Valley's long-awaited 1.6 update hits PC in March. Developers express uncertainty over Apple Arcade's future. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Apple Arcade is going to shut down. We're seeing increasing numbers of Apple Arcade exclusives come to PC or being ported to other platforms. Now, there's just no reason to have any faith that Apple would support games or care about games. Apple also, after spending, I think it's probably billions of dollars trying to develop a either electric car or an automatic driving car that would be an electric car, they've just abandoned that project and given up on it as far as the Apple car concept. Despite the fact that I imagine a lot of people probably would buy an Apple car. Let's move on. Let's see. Until Dawn Studio Supermassive is reportedly laying off 90 employees. These stories are going to be particularly old, but since we haven't gotten clips to work in a long time, it still makes sense to go through them. Tekken 8 hits 2 million sales in its first month. Baldur's Gate 3 exec condemns threats and toxicity over developers as they work on mod support. Final Fantasy music legend Nobuo Uematsu doesn't think he'll ever compose a whole game again. Switch 2 is targeting March 2025 and was delayed to avoid shortages, a new report claims. Bravely Default producer teases an announcement later this year. Helldiver 2 bucks UK physical game trend as weekly sales rise for the second time. Rainbow Six Siege's director believes the game can last forever. Miyazaki says there's a high possibility he delegates directing for the future Souls games. Halo co-creator Marcus Leto has left the EA Battlefield studio he founded. Rise of the Ronin's latest trailer explores combat styles. Activision is working to fix Modern Warfare 3 and Warzone progression tracking issues. Warner says Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League has fallen short of expectations. Nobody's even mentioning this game at this point. Modern Warfare 3 tops US's January sales chart ahead of Tekken and Suicide Squad. Nightingale Studio says it's prioritizing an offline mode following fan feedback. And that is going to bring us to the Gamatsu articles now, which we really don't have a ton of them. So, yeah, it still feels like we aren't really having a lot of announcements of new games, not a lot of press releases of new games. PlayStation Plus monthly games lineup for March 2024 announced. I'm not sure that there's anything super interesting here. You have Destiny 2, The Witch Queen, F1 2023, Sifu, and Hello Neighbor 2. And then the finals Sleek Bundle, or SO Sleek Bundle. Fantasy action RPG Vindictus Defying Fate announced for consoles and PC. Let's see what this looks like. It looks a little early. You know, this reminds me, there was this game where you were going to play as a troll that was announced a couple years ago. I don't think that game ever came out. Yeah. Yeah, I don't believe that game ever really came out. Or if it did, it didn't sell well. Maybe it did come out and it just didn't sell well. Unicorn Overlord Yosef's Guide to Combat trailer is available on Gematsu. The romance visual novel Arcania Alchemica is coming to the PS4 and Switch on June 27th in Japan. Let's see. It doesn't have a Steam link, but it was released on PC in December of 2022. I mispronounced that too. That's Arcania Alchemia. No C at the end. Hibiriki Enjoy Edition announced for Switch. That is a mouthful of a Japanese word. NetEase Games establishes a new studio, Bullet Farm, led by David Vonderhaar. Dragon Ball FighterZ for PS5 and Xbox Series launches February 29th. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth Physical Edition discs have been mislabeled in Japan and Asia. Which you insert the play disc to install and the data disc to play the game. I don't know how you make that mistake, but yeah, it's kind of believable too. I imagine the same artist was doing both images and then there's just not enough people paying attention to the image versus the data that is being pressed into the discs, which at this level I assume the discs aren't actually being pressed. Maybe they still are, but I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't just kind of a laser burning like you would a CD burner, Blu-ray burner. I wouldn't be surprised if they are all just being burned at this point. It would be interesting to certainly research with the high density multi-layers of a Blu-ray disc that a PS5 disc would be. What does the factory pressing process look like there? What kind of clean room do you have to do to make sure not even a fraction of a speck of dust lands on the disc? Anyways, moving on. Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth series ports are coming to the PS4 and Switch. I'm pretty sure all of these games are already on Steam. It does certainly highlight that Hyperdimension Rebirth is popular enough to get ports. Also, it highlights how we're still continuing to see this trend in which if a game is a little bit less demanding, if it's a little bit more anime focused towards the Japanese market, they aren't really bothering to make PlayStation 5 versions of the games. We're seeing a lot of announcements for games for the PS4 still. And I imagine Sony would really love to see that not to happen and instead have everybody buy a PS5 instead. Although maybe Sony doesn't really care because maybe they're not really making profits on the sales of PS5s. Very well could be a case where the best thing for both Microsoft and Sony would be to just let their premium consoles stay around for a few more years, and thus they can just reduce the price and of developing those premium consoles instead of trying to compete with yet another generation of hardware that nobody really needs and nobody can really afford. Famitsu review scores from issue 1839 are available on Gamatsu. This gives Final Fantasy VII Rebirth a 38 out of 40, very high, although one person gave it an 8 out of 10, where 3 other people gave it a 10 out of 10. Takes around 40 hours to clear the story and over 100 hours to complete everything. That is not too bad. Like, you still are tripling that potentially for the entire Final Fantasy series when everything is said and done, but breaking it up that way into 3 games, I definitely could see myself playing 40 to 80 hours in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and not feeling like I was wasting too much time in a Japanese RPG. Helldivers not getting particularly great reviews at 30 out of 40, and then Unicorn Overlord getting higher reviews at 36 out of 40. Apparently Unicorn Overlord takes 40 to 50 hours to clear and over 100 hours to complete everything. I wonder if maybe Famitsu just says or over and over 100 hours by default. Maybe they're not actually reviewing the game past 100 hours, which that's fairly fair, I think, too. If your main goal is that you're trying to have 4 people review 3 or 4 games every week, asking them to spend more than 100 hours on 4 or 3 games would just be way too much time. 40 hours a week really should be what it is, and so at minimum, if 4 people really played even the 40 hours to beat this game, then they would have been spending extra time playing Helldivers 2 and another week's worth of work in the same week. Playing Unicorn Overlord. I don't know if that really is the way it goes, though. I wouldn't be surprised if there's one person assigned to actually play the game, and then they submit some kind of report, and from that report, everybody then votes. That would probably make more sense. Giant Bomb's Bombcast used to be a lot like that too, where one person would talk about a game and then everybody else around the table really hadn't played the game at all, and so, but then there wasn't really a voting scoring system attached to that. It was just a bunch of people sitting around the table making a podcast, talking to each other. Anyways, moving on. Dread XP and Darkstone Digital will announce Paranormal Activity found footage from multiple platforms. This is due out in 2026. Do we have a Steam link? Nope. Fishing Reel Days of Summer has been announced for the PS4 and 5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. This is due out in summer. I guess I have to be somewhat careful. Apparently this is a long-running series. No Steam link though. I have to be somewhat careful here to make sure I'm verifying that Gamatsu is doing what Gamatsu has been doing for as long as I followed them, and really talking about every press release and every game. If at some point Gamatsu started to get a little lazy and started to talk about fewer and fewer games, I would have a hard time catching that. I could easily overlook it. But it does seem a little weird that there's only 3 more Gamatsu articles, and I've maybe opened one link to one announced game so far. We are seeing other announcements, but nothing has a Steam page. Shin Megami Tensei V Vengeance pre-orders are now available. That would be actually Shin Megami Tensei 5. I definitely saw some posts and complaints that Shin Megami Tensei 5, the original version, was an unpolished game and it had a boring story, and now they are releasing this Vengeance game that is going to add a new story path that is hopefully going to be more interesting and fix some bugs. So effectively, the people who bought the game originally feel like they've been tricked into being beta testers for a actual bug complete edition. I won't call it a bug-free edition. But yeah, it does seem very weird to so quickly come out with a new version of the same game. But I think Atlus has done that with the Persona series too, and it does seem to be a uniquely Atlus gimmick that is not seemingly that popular and is not very moral, I think would be the argument. These are all rated M for mature games, so I'm trying to look at the cover and see if there's maybe some censorship happening here of like the PlayStation version versus the Xbox version versus the Switch version. Doesn't really seem like it. It seems like the Switch version is just the cropped version here, and seems like maybe the Xbox version is zoomed in by maybe 5% or so. But the amount of skin of these different spun around twisted characters still seems to be about the same. So yeah, I think I'd have to look really hard, see if there actually is much visual difference that couldn't just be attributed to squeezing in logos and putting in top banners. PlayStation 5 still has a pretty poor system here with a top banner like that. They're all pretty poor systems at this point, where it feels like this and all of this stuff should go away. And I guess you do often have reversible covers that do get rid of the names and a lot of the labeling. ESRB kind of requires the rating to be on the front page when it probably should just be on the back. But then Nintendo, PlayStation, and the Xbox all putting their labels at the top. And if anything, I guess PlayStation 5 makes it easier to crop by just having a top banner, but you're losing a lot of square footage for what is just dead space at that point. Empty space, negative space. Anyways, let's move on. F1 24 announced for the PS4, 5, Xbox One Series, and PC. Let's see, do we have this on the fall list? I guess not. And these screenshots are really not showing you anything. B Project Ryusei Fantasia is coming to the West for Switch and PC. I assume this is an otome visual novel, looking at all the anime boys here. It's boys idol group. Yeah. I'd assume it's a young maiden otome novel and not a yaoi gay boy on boy or guy on guy. I say boys, but yeah, they all seem to be teenagers or older. And see, that's just the end of Gamatsu, and I usually expect a lot more articles and tabs from Gamatsu than that. NetEase hires veteran Call of Duty designer to lead a new AAA studio. Nintendo is gunning for Switch emulator Yuzu with a new lawsuit. Keywords and Charisma partner to let devs harness AI-powered storytelling platform. This might be something that gets used more. I definitely have heard of Keywords as a company. I still don't really have a way to make these clips more unique. Like, what I would need to do is sort them all into an array and then alphabetize them and see if they're the same article over and over again, but I would have to basically try and pull out keywords, not the company keywords, but actual keywords, to see if the articles with different headlines are talking about the same thing. And that would be very difficult to figure out the similarity of two sentences. That isn't a simple JavaScript command or coding issue. So instead, I'm just going to end up with clips that talk about the same article from 3 different sources, which is probably not terrible. There might be some interesting A/B testing, ABC testing in this case, between whether people click on clips from Gamatsu versus Video Games Chronicle versus GameDeveloper.com. I probably should just get rid of the banner switching completely. It's a mess, and frankly, it's just, I don't think as good as just leaving the crawling banners at the top to stay the same. Deck 9 Games lays off 20% of staff. There's a report that Star Citizen developer CIG laid off staff following the studio relocation. Almost certainly true. Anytime you move a studio, there's going to be at least a couple people that you're not going to want to actually move with you. GDC session guides are back and better than ever for GDC 2024. Remember, GameDeveloper.com is a self-interested party as far as the Game Developer Conference goes. I think one of the things about GDC that probably should be addressed is that they should probably put more of their presentations on YouTube like weeks later after the event happens, and then that way the public would be just more encouraged to watch them. And then maybe they do that and I just don't know because I don't follow whatever YouTube page they might have, but they don't promote those videos on GameDeveloper.com either. So it seems like people go to these presentations, have these kinds of meetings that are going to feel a little secret to anybody not there, anybody who's not a game developer, or anybody who just can't afford or chose for some other reason not to go to GameDeveloper.com. And yeah, if they're saying something good, it should just be made available to the public like TED Talks are. If they're saying something crazy, like they're just spouting a whole bunch of SJW nonsense, well, they should probably put that out publicly anyways and just see how the public responds to that. But yeah, there probably is some politics in some of these speeches that people would not agree with. But whatever, put it on YouTube, turn off the comments if that's how it has to be or how you would want it to be. Anyways, let's move on. Balatro made at 1 million within hours of release. Firesprite's Twisted Metal game among the cancelled PlayStation projects. PlayStation is shutting down the London studio amid mass layoffs. Sony is reevaluating PlayStation studios and cutting 900 jobs. Stardew Valley thriving more than ever after topping 30 million sales. Stardew Valley really succeeding to take the Harvest Moon concept and have an audience that stays around. I would say Stardew Valley probably is in the same breath, can be mentioned in the same breath as something like Minecraft, in that it's just a game that would never truly go away no matter what happened. Unity says laying off 25% of the staff was about reigniting revenue growth. Ubisoft and Keywords fail to credit Skull and Bones translators. Apple Arcade devs allege the smell of death amid payout reductions and canceled projects. Just looking at the screenshots of these games they've picked, these all look nondescript and boring. Like, the most I could say is I can see that this is a dress-up game for kids. And this is probably a tower defense game. This might be a tower defense game too. Couldn't really tell you what that is or what that is. Or what that is. It's probably a stealth game if I was to guess. Assassin's Creed 4 player count rises post Skull and Bones launch. Let's see. So yeah, it went up to 3,600 concurrent players, and then its peak had died in 2020 at around 1,000 players. So triple what it normally got. Which, in fairness, if that was Ubisoft's plan and they were just going to put out a cheap game to remind people to go and play Black Flag, that would have been fine. But they spent like 10 years developing Skull and Bones and way more than a few bucks to remind people that Black Flag exists. If anything, almost certainly the better move would have been to have a remaster of Black Flag and just release that instead. Update: Take-Two responds to a recent Popcore layoffs with no comment. So apparently there is some rumors that layoffs are happening at yet another company. Okay. So that's going to be it for this show. I'm trying to figure out a better way to wrap up my shows. I really don't think I've figured it out yet, but yeah, I'm trying to maintain, say thanks for watching, but then right before then I'm saying watch every second. And so I think shortening the wrap up to just keep watching and then comma thanks might be the way I'm going to try and go. Anyways, we'll try it this time. That's it for this show. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep watching. Thanks.